Everybody here in the audience in Rafts in Switzerland, but also everybody who joins us remotely in the live stream to Biostasis 2025. Some of you, of course, have been at these conferences before, where we have like a plethora of different talks from mostly scientific topics. This year, there will only be a small amount of talks, right? And I'll quickly introduce them in a second. And then over the next 3.5 hours, we'll go through these talks. Because Biostasis is more and more moving into a community event and an extended training. So So the amount of talks is not the main focus anymore. But nevertheless, I'm still happy that people join us from remotely, at least for these talks. And I'll walk you through a couple of things. So maybe to get started, from a structure perspective, who are we even? Right? So there's three main organizations that work together. There's Tomorrow.bio, which is the day-to-day organization. It does all the outreach, it does the memberships, you sign up with us, right? And Tomorrow.bio also does all the SST and the cryoprotection. So that will be the team that sends the medical teams to you should you ever need us. And then the funds, so if you then pay for your cryopreservation, they go to an organization called the Patient Care Foundation. It's a Zug-based foundation based here in Switzerland that is, in quotation marks, the legal guardian over the people who are in long-term cryostasis. It also manages the funds of people in cryostasis, invests those funds, and then out of the return pays for long-term storage. And then pretty much pays rent at the European Biostasis Foundation, where we are today in the facility here in Rafts, to keep people long-term in cryostasis, and then once, and if possible down the line, would pay for revival and reintegration in society and so on. And then last but not least, of course, the European Biostasis Foundation funds research at labs, mostly in the US, but also in Europe, to push the state-of-the-art of cryopreservation forward. So this is kind of our general structure and who we are. Maybe do we have the slide somewhere? So, because if you want to ask questions, of course, in here, you're more than welcome to ask questions. We're going to hand over around the microphone. And then for people remotely, they can join via Slido. I hope this QR code works because it might be cut off, but online we see it, I think. So you can go to a page called Slido, sli.do. And then if you enter the event number 3109376, you can ask questions. And you cannot only ask questions, because of course most of you who have joined our webinars more often know this procedure already. You can also up and down vote questions, or I think you can only upvote them. So if you feel like someone else has asked a question that you feel particularly excited about, then you can upvote that question, and then later on we do a long Q&A and AMA session where all of you can ask any questions that you want, right? Either today about the topic, what we will cover today, or about something in the field of cryopreservation in the broadest sense of the word, what you always wanted to know. So feel free to scan the QR code or put the link, and I think the team will also put the link into the YouTube chat, so you can of course copy it from there. But now, without further ado, the first topic would be what's new at Biostasis. As I said, we kind of over the last year changed a bit the model of what this event is about. So in the past, as I said, we started out this conference pretty much as a scientific conference with target or having different speakers tackle different topics, from new cryoprotective agents to how procedures work and so on and so on. Now going more and more, and this already started in the last year, and then going forward, I think we will focus more and more about it. We will do less scientific talks, at least in this venue or in this conference. We will do more so scientific talks and updates in our webinars, right? Once in a while we invite speakers or do updates ourselves. But here it will be more about community building, about doing stuff together in the future, workshops, in feedback, discussions, and so on. And then, of course, very importantly, also member-only days. So only inviting a certain day the people who have already signed up with us to push this community focus more and more forward. And later on, my colleague Alessia will speak about this idea about what we will do more in the direction of community. And last but not least, Biostasis will more and more go into the direction, apart from this community and member focus, also into a training focus thing. So tomorrow, There will be a very extensive, from surgical to SST training. That though is a closed event. So if you have not been specifically invited, that one is unfortunately not open to the public. This is only for people who are actively in the field of delivering cryopreservation or SST services, mostly doctors, perfusionists, and other people who are interested in this field. But of course, if you are, and if you are from one of those professions, or not, if you're just a person who says, listen, I live in country XYZ, and I definitely want to build a cryopreservation emergency local response team here, then feel free to reach out to us, and in the future, we might in fact also be then able to invite you and have you participate in those trainings. I briefly already said it, this day, yesterday was a member day, today is kind of the conference day, and tomorrow will be a day for medical professionals focused on training. Now, what's new at Tomorrow Bio? I'm kind of briefly walking you through all the different organizations and what they're currently focusing on, and then going forward what we will focus in the next year. So at Tomorrow Bio, we're set up right now. You might not see this perfectly because the screens are a bit too bright for that. Basically showing our coverage area in the US and in Europe right now. As a reminder for those of you who are not that engaged or not day-to-day engaged with us, we currently only allow sign-ups for new members, either if you're in the US or in Europe. We still cover you globally, but we want to have as much of a concentration of our membership in these two geographic areas to be able to have a very high quality response. So in Europe right now, we have these locations. A couple of locations are, in quotation marks, our locations, meaning we have teams there, mostly in Zurich and in Berlin. We currently have in Europe 4 ambulances ready. The people who were here have seen them. I'll show some pictures in a second of them as well for those who join us remotely. And then we are in talks and in training processes with a range of different local organizations. Right? Normally, of course, we always send one of our teams to wherever the patient might be, all over Europe, be it Portugal, be it Spain, be it wherever. But of course, cryopreservation cases can also happen without any advance notice, right? And even though we would then, of course, jump with our flight kits on a plane and fly to wherever the patient is, it is still very helpful if someone already starts initial cooling to reduce the amount of ischemia. So in a couple of these locations, there are people who said, listen, I'm a doctor, or I'm a whatever, or at least I'm interested, and I'm happy to help with this initial response, right? And due to the amount of how many people are currently signed up for cryopreservation, it is not yet possible that we have teams and maintain teams everywhere. So for us, this kind of dual model where if everything goes well and we know early, we send one of our teams, and then everything done by professionals. That's of course the preferred option. But if someone dies without prior advance notice and we're not have been made aware of this potential case, then it's still helpful that someone starts cooling, right? And until a time when we will be able to have teams everywhere, right, which of course requires us to have more members to somehow make that financially viable, this dual structure, in my mind, makes a lot of sense. Now, of course, I said it many times already to at least the people who are here. In Europe, we have 3 additional ambulances that we have already bought and that we're now currently in the process of retrofitting, and they will be done sequentially, and then we will distribute them all over Europe. So Europe will be covered by 7 ambulances relatively soon. 4 are ready right now. The 5th one is currently now being started to be retrofitted, and then they will be added one after another. In the US, we currently have 3 states that we're covering: California, New York, and Florida, each of which has one ambulance. And now in a couple of areas in North America, we're planning additional locations, right, to then also cover the continent from ideally 3-4 locations, currently from 3, in the future then from 4. Even though our focus currently is still on these 3 states, even though if someone reaches out to us from another state, they can sign up with us, but we always are very focused on wanting to make sure that people understand what they sign up for. So if someone signs up with us from Chicago, of course, we want them to be aware that in Chicago, there wouldn't be a team on site. We would need to bring in a team from somewhere close by. Of course, this is always just how it looks right now. Down the line, the goal, of course, would be always to cover this way more. So that's Europe, and then from a US perspective, more and more teams will be added in the US as well. These ambulances that we're currently building, now we always try to, and Sacco will elaborate that a bit down in his talk as our engineering lead. We always are very focused on having these ambulances standardized, right? Because since we have multiple ambulances that are being used by similar teams, so we have like 8-9 people right now in Berlin that are trained to participate in SST procedures. But of course, if we want dispatch with an ambulance that might be located, let's say, down the line in Spain or in the Nordics or wherever, that ambulance needs to look and feel and be everything as close as possible to the one that they have been trained on. Right? Of course, it's not possible to train everybody on different methodologies and so on. So, of course, that's kind of repeating or it's a repetition for those people who have been here and where we already looked at the ambulances. We think in these ambulance generations. By and large, from generation 1 to generation 3, what is being in these ambulances has pretty much stayed the same. It is just slightly how exactly it's being done, you know, how bright the lights are. Like the generation 1 ambulances, they had like, for example, they had like metal strips on the roof where you could clip on magnetic flashlights if you wanted different light angles, right? And of course they had lights, but you know, in surgery you need high, you want to really have high illumination. So there you could clip them on. This was kind of our initial setup. Now all these ambulances have multiple light angles. They have, as you have seen, like they have surgical lights that you can move around and reposition and so on. So generation 1 was kind of our very first ambulance that we've built. It's not here today, but it is stationed in Berlin. This is the ambulance where we did most of our cases with. But for those of you who have seen it, it's a bit of a mess. There's like cables and tubing flying around everywhere, right? And for those people who know what to do there, they kind of have an overview. But for new people, it's a bit more difficult to be trained on those. Then all the things that we learned from these initial ambulances, and when I say learned, I mean either in real-world cases or in simulated cases, right? When we talk about trainings, technically we don't do trainings anymore. At least most of the trainings we do are full on A to Z simulated cases, right? Where it starts from an initial call where, of course it's simulated, but from the call to the person has been brought to the final storage location, right? It includes driving and everything as much as you can to simulate it. And from real cases and these simulated cases, we learned a tremendous amount of stuff. Like from what do we need, what sometimes breaks, right? One example is always that we got a bad batch of perfusion circuit tubing once, right? And this tubing just constantly broke. These roller pumps, they kind of put these tubings under a bit of stress because the rollers are basically compressing the tubing, and it is constantly broke. Well, not constantly, but every half hour or so, right? This was the trigger point where we said we're not doing trainings anymore, we do simulated cases, because now we want our teams to be trained. What do you do when a tubing breaks? How do you handle this? Right? And of course, this is just an example. I also want them to handle if the power goes out, right? We want them to handle if the data logger doesn't work, and so on, and so on, and so on. So this is what we all learned in these first generations. Then all of the things that we learned and that we could improve, we put into a second generation, and then now we're at a third generation. This is generation 1. You kind of see it very clearly. It's an organized mess of different sizes of tubing and cabling and so on the roof of these ambulances. with like, individual data loggers back then still. This was a time where we tested our new integrated data loggers. So these are the data loggers that you can buy. We've built now multiple generations of integrated data loggers. This is one of those, and so on and so on. But kind of generally a mess. This is ambulance number 1. Right. This is also our old setup of how our perfusion systems was mounted. Back then they were mounted on the ice bath. Right. You kind of looked cool and everything, but you needed to always take them off when you want to take the ice bath in and out, right? Because of how the angles work. The new ones now are like cage built, and Sacco will show that in his talk as well. Then generation 2 already got a bit. Generation 2 already got a bit more, integrated, more organized, and so on. You see now we have surgical lights, but there's still tubing, there's still cabling everywhere, and so on. Here we did the first big step of standardization. So all the locations, all the holders, all the lights, and so on got standardized. Camera systems, and so on and so on. And now, since recently, we have generation 3 ambulances, which is now everything is integrated. And of course, the people who have been here saw them in person. Again, all of this engineering stuff, Sacco will elaborate a bit on, but you can kind of see now everything is like nicely built in. It looks significantly cleaner. It is cleaner, and not only it is cleaner, but it's also optimized to the procedures of how we do cases, right? I won't talk too much about this today, but in our case, we do procedures with 5 people, 4 of them in the ambulance, and then 1 support. And everybody of these 4 people has a defined role. And of course, for that person who, for example, needs to take or make sure that batteries are being replaced, they need to have the batteries close by, and so on and so on and so on. So this is our ambulances. These are the 4 that we have recently bought. One of them you've seen here live. That is one of the ones that we have now retrofitted. And then the other 3 are still in waiting. We'll probably start deploying the second one early next year. And then depending on how much we find people who, as local support, who can man them, then we would go on like that. A topic, kind of switching gears a bit, that some of you have been, rightfully bugging us about. For a while now, we've been working on a system that doesn't necessarily only rely on bracelets or on necklaces for emergency response, but we've been working on an emergency app that. And since I'm getting very warm here, let me quickly change all my microphone setups. We've been working on these emergency app. Basically, the idea here is that under normal circumstances, our goal is always that someone contacts us and says, "Hey, my doctors have told me that I have 6 months to live, and of course I'm signed up with you guys, so you need to slowly get ready, right? And I'm in country XYZ and so on, and then we can get everything ready and organized." But of course, there have been cases in the past of people who wanted to be cryopreserved. Luckily, not with us, but with other organizations. And it's only a matter of time until this will happen for us as well, where people where they die without telling anybody or without any prior knowledge. Right? They're just being then found in some cases like a couple of days after. Right? Like just pure logistics. There's no other way of and how to do that. So from our point of view, there's 2 things that you can do, right? You can strongly advocate and advise people to make sure that, if there's any indication that something might happen, tell us early, be in contact and so on. Tell your family, yada, yada, yada. But nevertheless, this doesn't reduce the probability to 0. So then, and also there's one more thing, there can be a time when someone is in a hospital and they do have a terminal condition, everything is kind of being made ready, but that person then says, the doctors say, "Hey, listen, this person will probably live for another, couple of weeks, maybe 2 months or something like that, right?" So our team would be say, "Yeah, listen, a couple of months, we cannot send the team yet." But then, of course, in some cases, a couple of months can can turn into next day, right? And then that person dies next day without anybody being there and without us being notified, if at least the hospital is not on top of things. Again, all of that can happen. Now, what we've been building for a while now is a system that connects to smartphones and, to smart devices, right? It's basically an app that connects to your Apple Watch or to your Pixel Watch or to your Oura Ring or to another smart device. And as long as that smart device sends, in our case, movement data, heart rate data, and resting heart rate data, and there's pretty much a deadman switch running on a server. And as long as we get data, that deadman switch is always being, reset. But if there's no data, right? Let's say if there's no new pulse data being sent, then it turns on an alarm. And then if you don't respond to this alarm and say, no, sorry, I just took my ring off because of showering, or well, you can keep them on, but for whatever reason you took them off, right? Then it would, at some point, if you don't react to these emergency, this escalation cascade, it would send an emergency signal to your next of kin, right, or your friends. So you in this system would say, my emergency contacts are these people, and then these people would call you if they get an emergency system. If they can't reach you, they would call us. The problem with the system, and this is also why this has been in development in my mind for ages, is because false positives and false negative detection is very, very difficult. For example, Apple devices, if they're in low power mode, they stop sending data. Right? It's all these annoyances of how you can get data from the API from either Google Health or Apple Health Kit and Google Fit. So you basically read data from there. But now, for most problems, we have found solutions. So for the iOS version, we're now in the last stages of development, and for the Android version, it hopefully is within this year that this app can go into open beta. We had one beta test in the past already, but we never felt like it really is to the level of reliability to control false positives well enough to make it usable. Because the point here is the following. This needs to be really reliable. Because the idea is that, with the smart ring and an app, I'm using this right now, right? And I probably statistically will need to use this for the next 50 years, or I'm allowed to I can use it for the next 50 years until it might actually be a real event. So it needs to be very, very low key. It can't send you emergencies all the day long, right? Because you would just stop using it. Again, the goal is here to use it for many, many months or many, many years. So this is for this kind of like low engagement, long-term interaction. And then we also have built emergency detectors that are ECG based. It's basically ECG stickers, right? If you're not doing that well, but there's no indication that you're going to die like super soon, for always a 2-week stretch, you can have a telemetry ECG sticker that sends data to us, and with a significantly higher reliability and false negative, false positive detection. But it's a sticker, and it only works for 2 weeks, so you cannot realistically do this for a couple of years. It's more so if someone is at a higher risk of maybe dying without any prior knowledge for a certain amount of time, for example, after an operation, and so on. Right. So this is the emergency app, and then going forward, let's talk about this new quality horizon, this new milestone in quality that we're going after. So this is the CT scans that I've showed many times, and that is our current main quality metric. So this is again a CT scan in pseudo color, and if someone is super interested in Sako's talk, there will also be a detail of how they're being done and what is the new version, how we do them. I'll show a sample of a set of that as well in a second. But nevertheless, basically you measure if the cryoprotective agent has gotten into the brain. But as you can see, it's not super detailed. So you get an overview, but it's of course not the fine structure. So some of you might know that we have started to collect consent that we're allowed to take small brain or spinal cord samples for electron microscopy is this stuff. So this is like a hyper high resolution image where we want to see, for example, these types of things. This is the synapse, like this kind of like blurry line looking thing here. And then you can compare the images that you would get after cryopreservation to how the brain is supposed to look in an electron microscope, right? And then in these electron micrographs, I've been saying that yesterday, those need to look also good, right? Because if this is all a mess here, then as far as we currently understand, the parts that make you and the parts that make me, personality, identity, memories, that's saved in this structure. How this is connected, how strong the weights of that connections are, and so on. So without that, cryopreservation might not make sense. I'm saying might not make sense is because it is possible that even if this looks bad today, it could be repairable in the future. But this is definitely not something that I would like to rely on, right? So we want to make sure that this looks as good as possible. The point to take these images, you cannot do it with a scanner. You need to have a small sample that you specifically prepare and then put into an electron microscope. So to do these pictures, we need to take small samples of neural tissue. And we have now started to ask our membership, more precisely, not the existing membership yet, but new people who sign up with us, to give us consent to either take a small brain sample, a so-called microsample. It's a very small piece that is also being taken in neurosurgical procedures. So as much as we currently understand, it doesn't do much. It's not like you're not losing memories or anything like that, but it is still something where you take a small part of your brain, right? Or a small part of the spinal column. And of course, spinal column, as much as we currently understand, doesn't have any memories or identity or like whatever might be important to you. And then if you take this sample, then you can do this check. And now of the people the new contracts that sign up with us, currently 26% of people give us consent. So for all of the people who are already members with us, we will send out these kind of consent documents and asking for consent over the next couple of weeks and months to also get consent. With this number, it already looks like we will be able, hopefully, next year to have the first data points, right? Just statistics, of course, so it might not turn out to be the case, but my hope would be that in our 2026 case reports, we will already, for some cases that have given us consent, be able to have these electron microscopy data. Sorry, questions, unfortunately, we need to do after, because the microphone needs to come around, because otherwise people who join remotely won't hear you. So people will bring a microphone after this talk. Okay, last but not least, brain barrier modification. Also a topic long talked about, but more and more getting steam. And also next year, hopefully, we have the first cases with blood-brain barrier modification. You kind of see it again here visually. This area here, you know, that kind of reddish shade, reddish-yellow shape here around the brain, there is no brain there. This is a shrunken brain. These cryoprotective agents that you perfuse, they draw out water from the brain. And that's why the brain shrinks. As much as we understand, that shrinkage is kind of, you know, isomorphic. So if you just put water again, it goes back. But of course, again, this is not something that we would feel comfortable with. So the reason why this shrinks is because the brain is, or the vessels in the brain, the blood system in the brain, the vessels are lined with a specific type of very tight linings, the so-called blood-brain barrier. Humans have that because the body wants to protect the brain against any potential external threats like, you know, infections, whatever, more so than the rest of the body. So the problem with this blood-brain barrier is that it is so tight that water can go through it, but cryoprotective agent cannot cross. So if you put cryoprotective agent in, the water goes out, but the cryoprotective agent doesn't go in fast enough. It goes in very slowly. So that's why you reduce the volume, because you lose more water than cryoprotective agent gets into the tissue. Now, what you want to do, you want to open the blood-brain barrier just the right amount. If you do too much, the brain swells and you can't perfuse anymore. If you do too little, this happens. So you want to open it just the right amount, that the amount of water that goes out is equal to the amount of cryoprotective agent that goes in, where there's no shrinkage and at the same time good perfusion results. And the problem is like this detail of not too much, but just the right amount, that is what makes this so difficult. So we have a couple of research projects running to figure this out, and hopefully next year we will have cryoprotective agent with blood-brain barrier modifiers implemented at the very least in training cases, if not into the first real cases, to not have that happen. Then, I said it yesterday, these ambulances are really, for us, the core of how we provide our service. So what we're going to do is what we call the Tomorrow Ambulance program, where if someone says, like we might say, you know, we want to put an ambulance into Spain, because in Spain we can cover Spain and Portugal and parts of France. But now, let's say there would someone now be in Portugal that says, listen, I live in Portugal and I really want to have an ambulance here. Because if there's a case, I want you guys to fly to Lisbon or Porto and then immediately take over. Now, from a financial standpoint, we might not be able to put an ambulance into Portugal yet, right? Because we don't have that many members there and it would just not make sense, nor do we have anybody to build it. So we start this program. At least some people have reached out to us in the past, like I would say like maybe 3, 4, 5 people who said, I want to have an ambulance for myself almost, right? And we build you an ambulance, we outfit it, and we train you, all at cost. You have an ambulance, a local ambulance then to wherever you are. The total cost all in, including all the medical equipment and everything you need to do an A to Z cryopreservation case, is around 120,000 euros. But there's one asterisk. If we have a case that is not related to you, you need to let us use it. So we're allowed to use your ambulance. That's why we build it at cost for you, right? And in fact, a part of the labor, it goes on us, and the trading goes on us, and so on. So you just basically pay for material and time. And then if there is a case in your region where we say, hey, this ambulance would be the best ambulance to dispatch, we can use your ambulance. But of course, we then outfit it again for free with the newest technology if there is anything new, so that yours is always up to date as much as possible. So if anybody, you know, remotely or here says, listen, I really always wanted to have an ambulance next door, right? Let us know, and we're happy to start talking to make that work. All right, so that's kind of everything that's happening at Tomorrow, and Alessia and Sacco will elaborate on a few of the more details of all these topics and how we're doing things. And there's like a new calibration that I'll also briefly show you in a second. And so on, but details of which will come at the end. So what's new at ABF? So these CT scans that you saw, they're always in pseudo color, right? CT scans are black and white, but we put them in color to make it more easily visible of what's going on. Now, to do that, you scan pure samples of cryoprotective agent. So these are different concentrations of cryoprotective agent. You cool them down to negative 196 degrees Celsius, and then you scan them. And then you see this is how high concentration CPA looks like. Right? This is how low concentration CPA looks like. Right? But these are pure samples. What we're doing going forward is we're using pig brain samples to do these calibration curves. Because now you have, of course, we're measuring the brain. We're not measuring pure cryoprotective agent. Right? So these are a bit now closer, and Sacco has a few more pictures on how we do this and so on. So it gives us a better calibration. Next year, in early 2026, when we do the case reports of 2025, we will recalibrate all of our old CT scans with this new, better calibration curve. We already know that the difference will not be crazy big, but just as, and in fact, like it might even look slightly better. But wait until the reports are there, it's too early to tell. But going forward, of course, we will only use this brain-based calibration curve. Then ITS. Many people have already mentioned that. Many people had questions about it. So ITS means intermediate temperature storage, for those of you who might be new to the topic. Normally, in the past, most cryopreserved people, including the ones here at EBF, are stored at negative 196 degrees. In fact, you would like to store slightly warmer at around negative 140 degrees to not have thermal stress during cooldown. So this is, as far as I know, the only whole body ITS doer in existence. At least I'm not aware of anyone who has whole body ITS doers, where you have these kind of big parts, or ITS doers are made out of 3 parts. Like one is a normal doer, pretty much like the ones downstairs. Then there's this very heavy duty, around 400 kilos or so, metal kind of heat sink thing that equals the temperature or works on reducing the temperature gradient. And then there's some tech to put the right amount of liquid nitrogen in to keep the temperature. So from, fingers crossed, next year onward, we will be offering not only immersion storage, but also ITS storage. Fingers crossed, because these things still need to be tested. It's possible that, I don't know, something goes horribly wrong and we decide that these things are not safe enough. But the goal would be that going forward, ITS would be something that we offer, and maybe even down the line will be the only storage technology that we have. But that might be a bit down the line. Bulk tank, all of you saw. Sako has more details, just to show one picture. And then what are we doing? What are we doing next year? I'm checking if I'm how much time. Okay, I'm already very good on time. And then we do questions. We always think about what is the biggest impact long term for cryopreservation, and what's the biggest impact that we can do in the short term. Now, at Tomorrow Bios, we have decided that next year our full focus will be on capabilities on growth. The other organizations, of course, will also work on research and so on, but Tomorrow will work on these two. Growth is nice and helps fill the builds and everything, but the main reason why we always thought, and of course still think, and will probably continue to have that opinion, that growing the amount of members is so important for this field, is because all these points of saying, it's not financially viable to put an ambulance into Portugal, all hinges on the fact that worldwide there's a couple thousand people signed up for cryopreservation. Somewhere between, I don't know, 5,000 and 7,000. It's a relatively small amount. That is worldwide. Right? Of course, there's some concentrations, but by and large, the amount of people who signed up for cryopreservation in a given country is very, very low. And of course, that then hinges, that then doesn't allow you to do like bigger like local capabilities of build up. So so for us, once you have a couple thousand people signed up with us, you kind of get into the next phase of what you can do. So Tomorrow was always there to put membership cash flow into research and medical engineering as well. We're of course not there yet that we can do that, but once we have a couple thousand members, and I think a couple thousand, I'm not confident to say we will have 1 million members at any point, or 100,000, but a couple thousand, low couples of thousands is a matter of time. Mid to high couples of thousands is a function of, do we figure out how to communicate this topic so that people, A, understand it, B, get all the information that they need, and then understand it in a way where they say, this makes sense to us. Right? That makes sense to me. Like all the tendencies of more people becoming agnostic and atheist, all of this goes in the right direction. Just it does not translate yet into cryopreservation. The reason why I'm confident here is we've now run sentiment studies in 3 countries, in the US, in Switzerland, and in Germany. And in Germany and some other countries, a couple of other research groups also have reached out to, have basically done questionnaires and surveys with people in sociology studies asking, like, what's your opinion about cryopreservation? What's your sentiment? And now, depending on how you ask, it's always somewhere between 20 and 30% of people saying cryopreservation makes sense to me. I want to do this. Right? Initially, when we did the first study, we didn't believe that at all. We in fact repeated the whole study because we thought there's something wrong. And then we added the question, like at the very end, we added the question of, like, do you want to give us your email address so that a cryopreservation company can reach out to you? Right? And then 7% still gave us their email. Right? And we were like, okay, apparently there's a lot of people who are interested. Initially, Tomorrow was very optimistic in the early days, right? Because then we ran Facebook campaigns and Facebook lead campaigns, and like thousands and thousands of people gave us their telephone number and their email address and said, hey, this is super cool, right? And then we tried calling these people, and no one ever picked up. Like, and if the people picked up, they're like, what did I say? I don't know. Maybe Facebook, scams you, and I think this is now how we understand it. There's a tremendous difference between interest in cryopreservation and even intent, meaning if you ask, it's similar to if you ask people like, how important is data privacy to you? Like a lot of people say, oh, absolutely important. And then Facebook brings out a new app where it says, hey, click here to accept terms and conditions, and everybody just clicks and says, fine, like whatever. No one ever reads it, right? Of course, it's also designed in a way that you're not supposed to read it, and it's difficult to read, and it's annoying. But like declared preferences and revealed preferences are really big things for cryopreservation. Like a lot of people say, this makes total sense to me, and then they don't never do anything. And even the people who say, I have decided that I will sign up for cryopreservation. We have a lot of people who sign up with us after telling us, I decided to sign up 10 years ago. Right? So we're trying to figure out, and still are trying to figure out, how can we without, making weird or like being like having like unethical marketing and so on, how can we communicate this topic in a way where people understand, hey, signing up makes sense tomorrow. And at some point we may will figure this out. So this is why we focus so much on growth. And then capabilities are still always very important to us. Of course, you could say, hey, for the next 10 years, I focus on growth and don't care about capabilities. But we want to build a culture internally that thinks at the utmost importance is how well do we do cryopreservations? What are the outcome metrics? Do they look good? Once all of them look good, what is the next milestone? This is why we're starting with this EM stuff now, right? Because on a CT scan, if there's not much delay on a CT scan, there is not much to do anymore. We have shown this last year. Like if you quantify the CT scan data, I don't know if Sako has this in his presentation, but he could put it in. If you quantify this, like it's somewhere in the 90, 96, 98 percentile, where 98% more than that is above where we want to be, right? Sure, we could get it to 99 on average, but the impact is not that big anymore. Meaning the question is now, the question was, what is the next horizon? And for us, the next horizon was electron microscopy. So capabilities will always be a focus as well. Now, for those of you who join us remotely, I remind everybody again, if you want to ask any questions, go to sli.do, put in the number 3109376, or scan the QR code, and ask any questions and up and down vote them. Now, we have ample time to ask any question, and now we're not doing ambulance stuff, like any questions that you might have about anything, obscure or not obscure, feel free to ask. And then Sadie will go around with a microphone so that people abroad can also hear or remotely can also hear. And then if there's questions in either YouTube chat or here, please focus on Slido. YouTube makes it a bit more difficult. Put them into Slido. Sadie will read them and I will answer them. All right. Shall we start here or shall we start? If there's any pressing questions, there was someone, I said to 2 people, let's wait a bit. Okay, there's a couple of questions. We're going to go back and forth between remote and on-site. Christine, let's start.
Hi, I have a question about the brain samples. Do you have a preference for the depth of the sample that you're taking and or the location and or cerebrospinal or spinal cord versus brain? Like, do you have, are there differences in where you take the sample and in terms of, for example, the ability of perfusate to get into vital structures?
Yeah, so you can give consent for spinal column and or brain. So you could say brain, no, spinal column, fine. Spinal column, we would do relatively high up, just where it's easily accessible. Like, I think the exact location there is not that important. We have some indications from our CT scan that the upper part of the spinal column is relatively, the perfusion quality is relatively closely correlated to the perfusion quality in the brain. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. Okay, so this would be spinal column. On the brain, the consent is for up to 3 samples. Totally fine if someone says, hey, I only want to do 1 sample is fine, 3 no, right? So there's flexibility there. We're also fine with someone telling us not this location, but that location. Normally, we would always do 1 cerebellum, 1 from, currently we think from the motor cortex, because cortex is kind of important. There's also in our CT scan data that the cortex is surprisingly well, not surprisingly maybe because it's also well vasculated, well perfused. And now the third sample, we would either take somewhere from deeper, but midbrain, or not that important maybe, or if at some point in the future we can do intra-perfusion CT scanning, there might be a heterogeneous perfusion picture, where parts of the brain are not well, or look less well perfused, and parts of, and the third sample would ideally be from a less well perfused location. Yeah. To kind of see the difference, right? So in an ideal world, right, you would be able to correlate the amount of ischemic time and the CT scan to the electron microscopy data. Currently, I think this is very much long in the future, but if you could say, if the CT scan looks great and there was less than X amount of SMICs, like this equivalent measurement of ischemia, then the EM would also look good. So that you can also estimate for people who don't give consent how well the EM would look. But that's future. So we would like to have different data points of well and not so well perfused areas.
But it's post case, not interventional. Like, you're doing the samples after the case is completed to assess the case quality.
After perfusion is completed, yeah.
Versus interventional, where you can actually do something about it if you're not getting.
No, like, I mean, maybe someone can do this, but electron microscopy takes time, right? We briefly discussed this yesterday. It's possible that maybe some type of light microscopy or maybe expansion microscopy could be done much, much quicker, where we would be able to get some data point intra-perfusing. But then again, our setup is always, we do most of the perfusion to even get good quality remotely in the field, right? And I honestly, I have not thought about this, but I deem it to be not that easy to outfit ambulances with some like microscopy setup that is meaningful in any way. So for the time being, it would be post preservation. Yeah. Thorsten, please.
I really like the Adopt an Ambulance program. One question on that, who then needs to take care of the maintenance? That is, if something breaks or it needs to be replaced, even checking in on it.
Yeah, so the deal would be that if we put an ambulance to where you are, you need to drive it around once in a while. You don't need to do maintenance, but you need to move it a bit, right? So maintenance we would again do at cost. Like if like new, like we can't guarantee that if we upgrade something that yours will also be in the first update batch, because at some point this becomes fleet management, right? Where you suddenly, if we already a bit annoyed at that, if we upgrade something in one ambulance, we now, and it works, we now need to replicate this into multiple ambulances. So down the line, at some point, if this becomes a thing where multiple people actually want to do, we would need to have one person who literally does fleet management, meaning upgrades our ambulances, then goes to, for argument's sake, again to Lisbon and puts there and upgrades that ambulance and so on. For the time being, it would be you're obligated to drive it around. If something breaks, we do it at cost. And yeah, that's it. I don't know. Maybe there was another question.
Hi, thank you. What do you think of the revival book? I forgot from Robert Freitas, the book.
Yeah, it's called Cryostasis Revival from
sir.
Robert Freitas. I think it's a great book. You should read it. I mean, it's 700 pages, so it's a bit of an extended read. But from everything I can say, it's not like I would say, hey, listen, this is like super wrong or anything like that, right? Like, I think it's a great book, and I would agree with most of it, as much as I of course have thought about like the intricacies of nanotechnology repair.
A short follow-up question: would it be possible to have at least a personal scientific conference when this conference is more of a member-side conference, or at least one full day of talks?
Yeah, so we would definitely do scientific conferences again, but we would mostly do them remotely, like as online webinars. The reason for that is, in many years, people tend to give the same talk all over again, right? Even a year, stuff can happen, but sometimes in science, stuff doesn't move, like there's not like this big new thing that we can now announce, right? So at the same time, scientific conferences, if you're not in the field and want to build partnerships, it's mostly about getting information. So do you need to be here to do that, or can you just also look online and now you have the new information? So in our opinion, scientific talks are way better just to do them online. It's easier for everybody, it's cheaper and so on. You can also have speakers that would normally not come here, and then, or like too far away, right? And that's difficult. And then at the same time, and then do these community things where it's like, for lack of a better word, hang out, network, and a couple of program points, which is much more difficult to do online, if not impossible in my mind. So it will be that split.
Yeah, maybe the talks that are really fundamental or really groundbreaking then, personally.
If there's something tremendously new, we would always be down. The problem is also, if you give fundamental talks, like introductory talks, some people will already be super bored, right? Because they heard them 3 times. And there will always be new people here. And you kind of already see this now a bit, like, how we had yesterday and we looked at ambulances today, there's already a bit of an overlap, right? And this would get way, way worse. So I think we would more so focus on-site. Yeah, there's going to be a couple of talks, there's going to be a couple of things, but the scientific program would be mostly online.
Thank you.
And let's also not forget our guests from remote speakers, so we can also mix in a question, of course, but feel free to go around here.
Coming back to brain sampling, what are the risks linked to that kind of?
Say again,
what are the risks?
The risks, well, normally, like, the risks are pretty much you lose some memory. Like, even though, of course, this is all a bit of fuzzy logic here, right? So it's not like this memory is exactly here, and if you do something here, you lose that memory. But then again, not me nor anybody fully knows how this whole thing works, right? We know that we take brain samples in mostly like neurosurgery operations, where small brain samples are being taken for microscopy, and these it's not like a detrimental effect, right? And in normal brain sample taking, you have the risk, like while you're live in neurosurgery, you have the risk of bleeding and so on. This, of course, we don't have that risk here. So from a risk perspective, for anything you do, there is some inherent risk. Someone can do something wrong and so on. But then the main risk would be maybe there was something important in that part. But it will not be like, at least it's unlikely. Again, I don't want to make any strong statements about what happens with brain where we don't fully understand it. I think that that's why we made it optional, because there is some downside to it, or at least potential downside. But I think it's acceptable to say, hey, I'm okay with doing it. Yeah. And spinal column samples, by the way, there I would be very strongly say, as much as we understand, no downside to it, right? Or all like the technology that you would require when we go back to Robert Freyer's book, Cryostasis Revival, right? The technology that you would require to bring someone back from cryostasis would very likely be the small brain sample, or sorry, the spinal column sample repair would be easily fixable by that technology. Yeah.
So what are the sizes of the samples that you take, and about how many neurons does that represent?
I don't know what it is in neurons, but it's like it's a needle biopsy, like super, like, I don't know, like cubic millimeters, if at all.
I don't see how that would really be an issue, right?
I don't either. Just from a theoretical standpoint, it's also difficult to say zero risk, right? It's not zero risk, and something could happen, but it's I think so in certain operations, right? You cannulate the ventricles that are these fluid-filled areas that I showed you, right? You cannulate them, so you put a cannula through the brain into these kind of fluid-filled areas, right? So basically in these areas, right, you can we don't see it, unfortunately. Pity, wrong picture. So there are these fluid-filled areas here in the brain. Some of you have seen them. Like we have sometimes pictures where we say these areas, no brain tissue there. There are like fluid-filled areas in the brain, these so-called ventricles. And if you have, for example, high pressure in the brain, these are being cannulated with a needle, kind of, to release pressure. And that's also being done. It's not like these people wake up and have lost all their memories or anything like that, right? So, or even any that we can detect. So that's why I'm saying it's within the realm of this is fine, but there is a risk to it. Yeah. Up here in the middle, and then.
I have two questions about the ambulance. Why cameras inside, and how much of the overall procedure can you do in the ambulance, and how much can be done only on site?
Yeah. So the cameras serve three purposes. One, before we had our unified data loggers, where Sako will show you how the generations, what we did in the past and what we do now. For whatever reason, data loggers, temperature, they're all horrible devices. I don't know who builds them, but they're all bad. They constantly didn't log temperature correctly, or they didn't log. To be fair, they're also a bit finicky. You need to click the buttons in a weird way, and then they record data. They're all not great. So we and everybody else had cases in the past where one data log didn't work, and then we lost data, right? And then I think in our earlier reports, you see parts of the curve sometimes where it says predicted data, because we have one point here and one point there, but in between the data, we don't have it. So we said, okay, so in emergency situations, stuff goes wrong. You cannot say everything will go great, right? We need to be ready for stuff to go wrong. And now the question is, if something goes wrong, how do we handle it? So initially, the cameras were there to log the display of the data logger. If it doesn't record, it locks it in a camera, and we now have a camera feed that then someone needs to go through and write down the data. But at least we have it. So that's purpose number one. Purpose number two is that we always want to train new people, of course, right? Increase the amounts of teams that we have and so on. So the cameras gives us training material. And because you can, of course, train procedures, but getting an A to Z understanding of how everything works together and so on, that's much easier if you see it in a camera. And since recently, these cameras can be remotely accessed by our team. So they're internet connected. So you can have people log into these cameras and then have an A to Z overview of what's happening in the ambulance. In fact, one of those cameras in the new ambulances you can move around, so from remote, and zoom in, and it has like, I think, either 8 or 16x optical zoom. Now this helps us for two cases. There can be cases where less experienced people are on site, just by chance, right? And then something happens where what they haven't encountered yet, right? And then you can bring someone in who can help. We had one of those cases so far where a team on site they were fine, but less experienced. So then someone died in the middle of the night, and they died earlier than we thought. So we didn't bring the full team in yet. There was just a rudimentary 3-people standby team on site that did the initial cooling procedures. But for surgery, I was driving in a car. Luckily, you can drive fast in Germany, as fast as you can to that location. And then, while I was in the car, Sako, Rishi, one of our other doctors, and me were advising the team on site, and they could see the cameras and everything. And we were a bit surprised how well this works. Like where you tell, hey, because you have 4, now 5 camera angles, you see everything, and you can tell, this person, please do this, right? Now we have 2-way audio. At that time, everybody had their headsets on, so you could talk to individual people and say, you need to now do this, right? And it works surprisingly well. Plus, there is always the case, and this is the last reason why we have these cameras, sometimes in these cases, stuff happens that is out of the ordinary. So for example, let's assume, I don't know, you perfuse and somehow the perfusion pressure goes up weirdly, but flow rate is still low, and these kinds of weird things, right? Now it's super helpful if you can bring external people into trouble or to think through the problem. What should you do in these circumstances? Should you terminate perfusion? Should we cannulate at a different point? Should we move over to immersion? You know, whatever you could do, how do we handle this? And for this, it's super helpful if you can actually see what's going on. So for all of these reasons, we have those cameras. And they have been a godsend. So none of our ambulances all of our ambulances will have a standardized 4 cameras with 2 terabytes, maybe either 2 or 4 terabytes of storage, and then remotely connected so that people can go in. Yeah. Oh, sorry, yes. So everything can be done on site except for the CT scans and the final cooldown. So in fact, not only our standard procedure is to do whole body field cryoprotection. It's not cryopreservation, because cryopreservation means cooling under glass transition temperature. It's only cryoprotection, because so all the chest compressions, all the stabilization, medication, oxygen, all of that, then all the surgical parts and all the perfusion with the cryoprotective agent and the washout solution and so on can all be done on site. And then CT scans and final cool down to cryogenic temperatures needs to be done here. Please.
Hey, how is the process planned with the electron microscopy? Is it because originally the plan was to buy a microscopy, then this was difficult, now you have a partnership, but how is it working with the logistics? Do you make the fixation out of it? The shipping, whatsoever.
Yeah, that's all super easy, luckily. The reason why we didn't buy one, like realistically, buying a TEM, like a transmission electron microscope, is they're huge and super expensive. And scanning we could have done. There are also smaller units and so on, but scanning is not that great. So and definitely we discussed it briefly outside, like the serial slicing. This is something that's really complex to do. So and then you could do these 3D reconstructions. So this is not something that we can reasonably. I think it's not our strong suit. So now the procedure would be the following: Tomorrow would take a sample, if again given consent. Then the cryoprotective agent would be unloaded. At the same time, the sample would be fixed. Then it would be embedded. Then sliced, just what you do for cryo, like very thin slices, and then put in electron microscope. Now, the unloading, so technically you can just give the sample to someone and they do everything for you, right? Which would be the easiest. The problem is they're not used to cryoprotected samples. So this unloading and fixation procedure, this is something that likely we need to do, which is not easy and hasn't even been done much. So this is what we actively will work.
Why can't be done with the cryoprotective solution inside?
I'm not an electron microscopy expert, but it doesn't work from how the sample needs to be prepared. Like these devices they're not like, you can do it a bit like this or like that, it will work. These are like devices, it needs to be done like this, otherwise the sample quality is not good in the end, right? Like you can do EM, but to do EM with good sample quality is difficult. And cryoprotective agent is it needs to be unloaded.
And the slicing would even be too expensive with an external company?
No, the slicing is easy. But the slicing comes last.
No, I mean with the reconstruction.
Well, it's expensive, but it's doable. Like, so this slicing basically means normally these electron microscope slices, they're just one slice, right? And you have a cross section that gives you, well, basically 2D information. And some of you might have seen them. What you can do serial slicing. So you slice and then you do another slice and you do these slices, you stack these slices, and then you scan all of these slices, and then 3D reconstruct them into computer, and then you have a 3D model. And one of the quality methods that you want to look at in these images is if you can trace axions. Like if you see that the axon, the active part of the the neuron is still intact. And that would be we would do that. I don't know if we would do this for every case, but we would definitely do this for some of them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Please.
Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
Two technical questions about the cryoprotective agent. Is it the VM1? Is it the M22? Which one are you currently using, and what are the prospects in the future? And the other one is regarding the intermediate preservation. Do you still use nitrogen, or is it something else?
Right. So it's neither. It's not VM1 nor M22, but it is closer to VM1 in composition. So in very simple terms, VM1 is ethylene glycol, DMSO, and a carrier solution. M22 is DMSO, ethylene glycol, formamide, a carrier solution, and ice blockers in a very broad sense. Ours is EG, ethylene glycol, and DMSO, and then a carrier solution and different concentrations and different wash-out solutions than what would be used in traditional VM1. But since it doesn't have formamide, it doesn't have ice blockers, and so on, it's closer to VM1 than it is to M22. So I don't know, we call it Tomorrow VM1, and maybe we give it a new name at some point, I don't know. Like definitely once we have the blood-brain barrier modifiers, then it is so far, so it has moved away from VM1 over time more and more. So at some point I think it's warranted to have a new name. So far we've been saying Tomorrow VM1. At some point there will be a fully new name, I think. Because then it doesn't have that much to do anymore. We use it because M22 is significantly more expensive than VM1. VM1 is significantly cheaper. And in the past, our main reason was that the amount of money that you spend on a case is given. Now, you could spend that on cryoprotective agent, or you can spend that on bringing the team earlier, right, and having more team members. And we always believe that the trade-off of having us in a lab under certain conditions slightly better cryoprotective agent is not warranted the money, because most of the problems in cryopreservations, why preservation is not good, it's not because of the cryoprotective agent, it's because the team wasn't there on time, I don't know, whatever, right? So we said the trade-off, we rather spend the money like that. If someone says, hey, I would like to pay $500,000 for my cryopreservation, then we would say, yeah, probably now it's worth it also to have like maybe M22, right? Because now, like, you know, the marginal cost of the end, I don't know how, I can't bring 8 doctors, right? The marginal cost of bringing more team, or the marginal benefit of more members doesn't make any sense anymore. By now, the additional argument is also, our CT scans look good. I don't know how much of that is due to VM1, but I don't want to fuck with the system that works. So until someone else releases CT scans that look consistently equally good, we're probably sticking with this and then optimizing it more and more. Your second question was ITS, remind me? Yes. So yes, ITS doers are still maintained with nitrogen, right, liquid nitrogen. The difference is that in an immersion doer, the whole doer is filled with liquid nitrogen. In an ITS doer, you have liquid nitrogen on the bottom of the doer, and then the patient is stored in the gas phase above the liquid nitrogen, and all the tech in the doer that I briefly showed is equalizing the gradient in that gas phase to, in our case, negative 140 degrees. Right? You could technically also build ITS doers. I mean, it doesn't need to be liquid nitrogen. You could build them from like electric even, but trade-off, like complexity would be higher, price would be higher, and it would be more dangerous if electricity goes out.
I saw there was 2 ambulances in Canada, and one looks
2. I think it should be 1.
Okay. Well, there's one that looks like it's over the Great Lakes, but maybe that's actually.
Yeah, you know, I would not take this. I like my geographical knowledge of Canada is not that deep. So
Okay.
I think I just put this somewhere.
Okay, understood.
It might need to be relocated.
Yeah, and I guess my other question is, when you place the ambulance in a location, would you also need them to store the perfusate, like to fly with, hundreds of liters?
Yeah, we would always do that.
Perfusate. And what is the storage requirement?
Yeah, so ambulances alone make no sense. It always needs to be with perfusate. Actually, not fully true. Ambulances alone do make some sense if there is cryoprotective agent reachable within, let's say, 5 hours or so. But of course, if we have someone who stores an ambulance, then usually these people would already be down to somehow collaborate, right? So we would always also position cryoprotective agent there. The storage requirement is having a large freezer. So all of the stuff can be frozen down. So even the concentrations that are later on needed at positive degrees, right, that freeze at that temperature, like high concentration CPA, of course, since it's CPA, doesn't freeze, but low concentration does freeze, so do washout solutions. But you can freeze everything and then keep it. And then the shelf life, of course, would be significantly higher than if you would have them not frozen. So you would freeze everything and just put it into large, like it's around like a 300-liter -20 freezer is the best way. Yeah. Okay. And then, as I said, these new ambulances, they also can maintain -20 in the ambulance. But this we would only do if we need to bridge like probably a couple of weeks or something like that. If it's literally like I want to have, there's a new base with an ambulance and cryoprotective agent, it will always be a freezer. Yeah.
What are your strategies for getting the most rapid possible pronouncement of death?
So there's a couple. And by the way, since we're already running out of time, if there's like online questions, we definitely need to start with that. Because of course, here people can ask also later. Okay, rapid pronouncement. So there's a couple of things. So first is like if it's a country where it's really difficult, if possible, advise people, if need be, if that's important to them, move to another country. Then it would be advocating with the doctors. And then, of course, there is some limit of what doctors would be allowed in those countries. You know, how pronouncement is being done differs from country to country, and there are some mandatory waiting periods in some countries. Period. That's it. I think more you cannot, as of today, do. You can move people to other countries or ask them to move to other countries, or you can advocate to doctors to pronounce at the fastest legally possible point in time. And both things we do, of course.
Okay. So I'm just going to dictate now some of the most burning questions that people have
Sounds
been
good.
asking on Slido, the most upvoted ones. So, number one, do you have an update on the long-term financial viability of Tomorrow? There was recently another financing round. If growth stops, will the company survive?
If growth stops, yes. So basically, Tomorrow, as I said yesterday, not in the live stream, tomorrow, as long as Tomorrow can get external funding, we're going to spend that external funding on research, on more ambulances, on whatever. If, for whatever reason, external funding cannot be, I don't know, cryopreservation is not hot anymore, I don't know, like there's a global financial crisis or whatever, and there is no external funding, then Tomorrow could not do more research and like push development and buy ambulances or whatever. We would then need to go back to kind of like a base operations, meaning having the team around, of course, fixing the ambulances, of course, doing cases. And with that, then Tomorrow would operate profitable. And we would wait it out until whatever the global financial crisis or whatever happens is done, and we can get external funding again. We always keep as much money on our account so that we can maintain it for multiple years, right? Because of course, sometimes you cannot make these switches super quick, right? You know, if you have just committed to have large research projects started next month, right, and then a global financial crisis hits, you might still need to pay that agreement that you just made. So we always keep multiple years on the account so that if something hits, we have enough time to stop like extra expenses to go back to that level.
Do you have an update on the Netherlands team? Is it still a partner location? It's been in training for a while.
Yes, we have. It will be in training for longer. No, so we think about this in the following way. If someone calls me right now and says, "Hey, my mother, sister, brother, whatever was a member with you, and they have just died in Amsterdam," then we're gonna call that team and say, "Hey, can you do initial cooling?" Would I be confident that that team can do it even remotely as well as if we sent the team? No. So we say in training because we would not say this team is like ready to take over without it being an absolute emergency. So there's stages, right? So if someone calls me right now, then any random person who's willing to start cooling is great, right? But would I feel confident to say this is now a fully trained team? No. So this is why it says in training. It will probably say in training, maybe we mean to come up with some more like a finer gradient, like finer levels of what team proficiency, like what do we think are different team proficiencies? Yeah, because otherwise, until we're really happy, they will all stay in training.
How does asset management work when we are in cryosleep?
So asset management has two parts during cryosleep. One would be you put funds at the Patient Care Foundation, or you have mandatory funds at Patient Care Foundation. Now, the Patient Care Foundation has an estimated investment horizon of somewhere between, let's say, I don't know, 80, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever, 100 years. So relatively long. So we invest in like global tech ETFs and so on that would normally be considered not a super low risk investment, also not high risk, but kind of mid, because it's stock ETFs. But if your investment horizon is very long, then this becomes a safe and at the same time kind of prudent investment thesis. And if at some point, so it depends, it's a bit more complex in detail. If for whatever reason there is a big financial crash and our assets would go down significantly, then we would go down in risk with the investment strategy, because of course we need to make sure that it doesn't run out of money ever. And the other asset management would be the structure that we have briefly discussed yesterday, where you could put extra money for having that money returned to you in the future. That structure as of today doesn't exist yet, but it would come up hopefully soon, where then the investment profile would be similar-ish.
Any update on plans for possible additional storage locations for Tomorrow Bio in USA or as backup in Europe?
Yes, in Europe, not so much. Long term, we want to have storage locations all over the world. The next one will probably be in the US, not because we think, well, it will be in the US, not because we think we necessarily need 2 storage locations, but from an opportunistic standpoint, there's another group of people or like multiple other groups of people who are interested in having a storage facility in the US. And we've been collaborating with these groups anyway, so kind of we're joining, or we have joined this initiative. After the US one, I think we would always do this for the time being very opportunistically. So if someone says, hey, listen, I want to build one in Japan and you can jump in, then maybe 10 years down the line, we'll build one. Or if someone gives us tremendous amounts of money, we might. But other than that, storage locations is not how this game is being won. Like all the other stuff is.
What is the main benefit of separating the Patient Care Foundation from EBF?
So the structure of this whole structure from Tomorrow, EBF, and Patient Care Foundation is basically there to have a balance between how fast you can operate and how safe stuff needs to be. Now, Tomorrow is optimized to be more innovative, more fast, and so on. And just by logic, it's slightly less safety to it. And then EBF is kind of the middle ground, and Patient Care Foundation is the max safe organization. Max safe means there's a long list of rules of what who the board members can be, and how board members need to keep update with the field, and yada yada yada. So the logic of the separation between EBF and Patient Care Foundation is that you want to, in some cases, act a bit more innovative, for argument's sake, and on the other hand, you want to have maximal safety and security, which kind of is difficult to innovate if you want to at the same time be super, super, super safe. Yeah. If there's no further questions, either from, okay, one more question? Sure, one more question over there. And then we would move on to the next talk. And then, so what we're going to do is there's one more talk now. Then we have a short break. Ashwin would then be the talk after, and he speaks remotely this time. So that's why we need a small break to get him on Zoom and get everything set up again. Yeah.
How big is the problem with edemas by full body cryopreservation? Because I heard different things about it, and also why you changed the formula of VM1, because I heard that was the original problem of VM1 with the edema, but I don't know.
Yeah, so this is indeed a topic that is always discussed. We do not see that. The reason why this was probably the point is that VM1 historically, of course, was used primarily by Cryonics Institute. The average Cryonics Institute case has a tremendous amount of ischemia. So they start perfusing on average very, very, very late. Now, if you start late, all the vessels have already degraded. All the blood-brain barrier is already broken down. Now, at that point, if we would have that amount of edema, that amount of delay, there might also be edema. We just have less delay. Now, if you compare that to Alcor cases in the past, which of course have used M22 for the last decades, they on average had significantly less ischemic time than CI always had. So on equal amounts of ischemia, like delay, there is no relevant difference that I can see in edema. So it is probably mostly a function of how much delay, ischemic time, warm ischemia there was before perfusion starts.
Why did you change the formula of VM1?
Because, yeah, so this was a process, right? So, for example, CI does washout with EG. And if I'm saying something that is not correct anymore, let us know. But as much as I remember, CI does washout with ethylene glycol. Ethylene glycol is probably a less good washout than MHP2. So we use MHP2. Then in the past, at least, CI started, again, my understanding is that they started first with a 10% weight per volume initial step. That is very high because it's kind of an osmotic shock. So you don't want to go that high. So we start with 5%. And over time, more and more of these changes accumulated, where at some point, we said, okay, so technically it's not VM1 anymore. It's now just by the fact that we don't do low concentration step with EG. We always do EG and DMSO, right? Already kind of warrants a new name. And then, yeah, more changes over time accumulated. I'm happy to answer, of course, questions again later. But now I would have Sacco take over with some things that. Feel free to ask him all the detailed questions about all the.
Thank you, Emil. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Some of you know me. I am Sacco, head of engineering at Tomorrow Biostasis. I also take care of day-to-day operations here at EBF. So what do we have new in engineering and medical technology at Tomorrow Biostasis? We have 3 new team members. One of them, Angelica, you might have met, Dinesh and Aaron. They are the ones behind all the tech that you see, the ambulances, the medication box, the training dummies. They do A to Z at Tomorrow, and sometimes they help me out at EBF as well. They take care of everything, putting on the grill yesterday, even those. Angelica has a medical background, and Dinesh and Aaron have engineering backgrounds. We have generation 3 of ambulances that Emil talked about. I will go a bit into details on later if you want questions. Of course, if you have questions, of course, I will go into the more details. The first generation of ambulances, they were a process to develop case after cases, after trainings. And at one point, they were as good as it can get. Everything would work for a case. We would go on cases, do everything. The new generation of ambulances, they have a little bit of quality of life. Don't know if that's the correct word or not, where things are placed a bit nicer, where if you need the data logger to be charged, you don't need to run a cable from above you. They're also all standardized and optimized to be off-grid. They still need to be fully tested for being off-grid, but they have 1,200 watts of solar panel. They have around 400 amp hours of battery. They have compressor freezers that can keep cryoprotective agent at minus 20 degrees for as long as possible. If there's no sun, the batteries can handle around 5 to 6 days. With a little bit of sun, there is no need of batteries. They take around 30 watts. This will help us to, if in the future we want to position these ambulances around Europe or anywhere else around the world, you can put the cryoprotective agent in there, close it, and sort of forget about it. They also have online power management. You can log into any of the ambulances, the new ones. You can log into them, check the battery status, check how much solar energy you're getting, and you can diagnose if there's a problem. Maybe the solar cells are a bit dirty, needs cleaning, or whatever other problems might arise. You will be able to catch it before the cryoprotectant thaws. They also have two-way communication. This has proven to be very, very useful in the past during cases, but in the past we used to have, as Emil explained, headphones for every person, just because even if you put your phone on speaker, you wouldn't be able to hear it inside the ambulance during an operation. It is so loud. There's the Lucas running, the chest compression device, the data logger, there is the Untitled CO2 that has a pump inside, there's the perfusion pump that is running, there's noises everywhere, a ventilator, which is I think one of the loudest ones. Therefore, we installed these sort of conference speakers that has 3D audio that you can hear anywhere inside the ambulance, and also the opposite person that you're communicating with can easily hear your voice during the operation. We also have a new set of cameras. The other ambulances also have cameras, but this one has a lot of improvement. This is the power management system that is in the ambulance that you saw. It shows you how much power you're getting, how much battery life you have left, what are you currently using, and it estimates how many days, hours, or maybe if you're using a lot of power, I don't know, minutes you have left. These are the new generation of cameras. They each have 16x zoom. They are remotely accessible. You can zoom in and out remotely, and you can also orient them remotely. Before, it was a bit annoying where someone had to explain, please move it left, please move it right. And then, of course, there's a couple of second lag where you would move it and they're like, it's perfect, but you haven't done the next move. And they're like, you mess with it, stop it. This is an example. I think this is around halfway of the zoom, 8x of the zoom, and the person is not even that close to the camera. We also have these iPads now. They have WhatsApp, again, for communication, connected to the comm center. And also, we have these apps that helps a lot during operation where you can, it's basically full anatomy of a human. If you need, if the team is not very experienced and they need a bit of help to orient themselves, or if the patient once opened up is very different than what you've previously seen. Of course, the person on the camera can help out, but you also have like a full anatomy 3D model that you can go around, dissect stuff, see where things are. This is an example of the freezer. Volume-wise, it has enough volume to hold all the cryoprotectant and the washout solution and be frozen for when it's needed to be used. Data loggers. I talked about this a couple of years ago, I think, during Biostasis 2 years ago. Before, this is what it looked like inside the ambulance. We had multiple loggers, each for different things. We had temperature loggers, we had pressure loggers, we had voice loggers, we had Untitled CO2 loggers, and like, to be honest, they were all very shit. You had to go through multiple windows to start recording. Sometimes they would record, sometimes they would not record. You cannot, for example, this one is on, but the viewing angle of the camera, you cannot see it. You had to directly look into it. And this was a very big problem. On our first case, I don't know if the second case as well, we did lose a lot of data. We didn't have pressure, for example, data. You probably have seen it in the case reports. We didn't have pressure, we didn't have temperature. So we started to design a new data logger that we showcased 2 years ago. We've been using it for every case since then. Of course, the first case, we still had the old shitty loggers with us, just in case it doesn't work. We've been using it for every single case since 2 years ago. We have not lost a single set of data. We still have backups with the cameras, but they've worked beautifully. The only slight problem with them was it still looks like a prototype where it's sheets of glass, you open it up, there's a billion wires and cables inside. It's just some Arduinos, Raspberry Pis, mini computers, all connected with this spaghetti of wire. And I'm always, whenever we have a case, I was always afraid, okay, is this gonna be the time that I press it and smoke is gonna pop up and Elmo's gonna yell at me? Never happened, thankfully. But then we started designing the second generation of data loggers. Everything that was inside, all the microcontrollers, all the microprocessors, the memory unit, the real-time clock, CO2 sensor, the ICs for temperature measurement. We designed it all into one PCB, very, very low profile, very thin. And I have a picture of the PCB if I go back. This is the PCB. I would not say it's fully at the final version. There has to be one last test, but this is basically what we have currently. We also moved to an e-ink display to save a bit of power. I think now this should theoretically be around 7 hours of runtime without having to connect it. We have a training case. Tomorrow is going to be the first test of the data logger, and if it's successful, of course, it's also going to be available for other Cryonics providers if they want one, or for other individuals that wants to have one to be prepared. CT scan calibration. I also talked about this a couple of years ago. We have some new updates. This is how we do visual analysis of our CT scans. Of course, you can do it numerically, but numerically it's going to be a bit hard if you want to do all of the brain. I can check this part, create like a region of interest, and the computer tells you what are the Hounsfield units. Hounsfield units are units of measurement for a CT scanner. They are measuring density. They're normalized against air and water. Air, I think, is -1,000 and water is 0, and that's how the unit is normalized. To be able to go through the whole brain and not to have to create regions of interest, which is almost impossible to do for a whole brain, we do these lookup tables, color tables, where we calibrate each color to a different level of cryoprotectant, And then the lowers, where there is no cryoprotectant, for example, blue, we calibrate it to frozen water, red is frozen blood, and then as it goes higher, it's higher concentrations of cryoprotectant. What it basically shows you is the green areas is where there is cryoprotectant, and theoretically there should not be any ice formation in those areas. The process to do this is before we used to have calibration curves based on cryoprotective agent alone, where we get multiple samples of cryoprotective agent. We, of course, temperature log them during the process. You take CT scans of them at different temperatures. Now, mostly we do it at -196 because we do full body scans. Before, we used to be only doing brain-only patients at -196 because it was very difficult. But now we have a new method where we can do full body scans at -196. You take the scan at -196, and then, of course, lower temperatures. You check each Hounsfield unit, and then you give this Hounsfield unit or density a color coding. These are the lower concentrations. You can see as it goes higher and higher, the green becomes darker and darker. At this point where it is green, it's where ice stops forming, and then the higher you have, theoretically, the less chance even of ice formation. There were some slight problems with this. We will see sometimes anomalies where the brain might show a bit higher concentration than the cryoprotectant. So what we decided to do was go away from just pure cryoprotective agents and infuse pig brains with cryoprotective agent, different levels of cryoprotective agent, the same as the CPA by itself, cool them down, and then scan them. This process is very, very long because the infusion just by itself takes around 6 months, and that is when we're not increasing concentration gradually. Each one is directly put into the concentration at the scan end. And then, of course, we take a CT scan. We do the same process that I explained. Unfortunately, we don't have full data on this yet. The CT scan, I did it, or we did it with the team 3 days ago, right before the conference started, and it still needs to be analyzed. But we will be using it for the next case reports that we will be doing. On Emil's request, I also added ROI data on one of our patients. These are the levels of cryoprotective agent that we have, the different concentrations, where the green is 60% weight per volume. And then this is 65% weight per volume where we want to be. And as you can see, this is a 2D slide taken of one of our patients. It's also available on our website. It is 99.59% above 92% of target, or 60%, and it's 98.95% above 100% of target. It almost cannot get any better than this. A few smaller things. We have, I wouldn't call it a new generation of perfusion circuits, but we have some small updates on the perfusion circuit that we have. Now they're in these cage forms, where if during a drive it gets dropped, or during a case for whatever reason it gets dropped or moves in a wrong way, or someone hits it, everything is protected inside the case. Nothing should break. If something breaks, we have replacement parts inside the ambulance. We have enough to make 2 perfusion circuits on the go. We have level sensors. We have low level sensor for the blood reservoir. That is the bucket where all the cryoprotective agent goes into before it gets infused perfused into your body. We had a bit of problem with this, where you're doing perfusion for 4 hours or so, and then at the end you forget that you have left the cryoprotective agent still running, and it fills up, starts to make a bit of a mess inside the ambulance. Again, this is not really a problem. It's just quality of life improvement. We also have bubble sensors, where it detects bubbles if it goes into the perfusion circuit. There are several protection systems in place before the bubble sensor, before the perfusion circuit connects to the cannula. We have bubble traps and other kind of systems. Nonetheless, we have these sensors. They have been working. The only problem we have currently is that they only detect relatively big bubbles and not the very, very small bubbles. We don't know how much of this is a problem, but again, we don't want any bubble to be introduced into the system. for now, we are keeping them while we're looking for other sensors that can detect smaller bubbles. We also have digital pressure sensors. So far, this has been the pressure sensor that we have. It's an analog one, and then it's camera logged. Anyways, during perfusion, the pressure stays almost very, very constant, or we adjust the flow based on the pressure so that it stays constant. But now we don't need to go through hours of video to see if anything happened or to log the data. We have a digital pressure sensor. They're also hot swappable, these perfusion circuits. You can take them out of the ambulance, put it into a hospital or a hospice, or if we're allowed to do the operation anywhere else, we can also take it out, put it into the facility. And this is the same perfusion circuit that we have in every ambulance and also in the facility downstairs. You guys might have seen it already, where we can also swap it between facilities and ambulances. We also have a new bulk tank outside. I was a bit not very impressed. I thought it's going to be way, way bigger than when they said 7,000 liters. But it is 7,000 liters. It gives us enough liquid nitrogen if something goes wrong for 5 or 6 months at the current rate of patients that we have downstairs, to be able to be independent on the refill company. They are internet connected, so we can check anywhere in the world. There's a portal from the company, how much liquid nitrogen we have left. The company comes, the threshold for refill is around 40% where they refill it. This also gives us access to their 24-hour emergency support and emergency refill. In case something goes terribly wrong, now we have the opportunity to just pick up the phone 3 in the morning, tell them we have a problem, and a truck will be with us with thousands of liters of liquid nitrogen within a couple of hours. We had the refill system. Now there are some small updates as well. Automatic refill system. We have ordered new sensors from South Korea. Have not arrived yet, which are going to be installed on all of the other doors. Currently, we only have one sensor in one of the door, and we use the rate of that sensor of that door to also fill the other doors. They are almost constant. There's like small discrepancies between them. Nonetheless, when we do refill, we have camera backups. Every time the automatic system kicks in and starts filling all the doors, it fills it to a level where the lids, the styrofoam lids of the door, raises about 5 centimeters or so. And then visually, you can also confirm that the refill system has filled enough. The system has been running now for around 2 years without any problem or interventions. We also have now a cool down door. Before we had this cool down box that you guys saw downstairs, the very big white box. That was one of my first projects as an engineer at Tomorrow.bio. We've done a lot of our cool downs in that box, but now we're slowly moving away from it. Not because it doesn't really work great, but just because it's very inefficient. It uses way more liquid nitrogen than the door because of the installation that it has. The installation is not even comparable to the doors. And honestly, it started breaking and becoming less and less efficient after every cool down, with the cooling down, heating up, cooling down, heating up. Another advantage of the cool down door is that if for any reason during cool down a problem arises, I don't know, liquid nitrogen hose breaks or system fails, which should not happen. The cool down system is an industrial PLC system that runs high-speed factories for tens of years. We use it for like a very, very minimalist computational operation. Nonetheless, if something goes wrong, we have time to fix it because the door is so well insulated that it takes, I don't know, hours or so until you start to see an increase in temperature. The same as dropping in temperature is also very easy. All right, I guess my last slide is not there. Anyways, that's it. I have around 9 minutes before our next speaker starts. Break, so I'll take some questions, if there is any. Yes, please.
Are you 100% sure that pig brains and human brains have the same density in the CT scanner?
I would say I cannot say 100%. You should ask Emil, but I can tell you that
pig brains or human brains have the same density in a CT scanner.
So as I said, we have taken CT scans before loading the pig brain, and there's also CT scans online that you can download of human brains. And under the CT scanner, they are almost the same. Of course, like a CT scanner also has some error rates. So it is close enough for me to say practically, but Emil probably knows theoretically maybe better.
The point here is always how can you improve, right? In the past it was pure CPA, right? For that it's much closer, right? I mean, there might be a couple of constituents different, right? There might be different fat content in these tests, but it's much closer than it was before. If in the future we have a research project with people who donate human brains, we might, but it's just logistically significant.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Hi. I was wondering if you've considered making your liquid nitrogen locally at some point, so that in case there is a global disruption like a global war or another pandemic or something, your supply of such a crucial consumable is preserved.
So we have, if something happens, we have hopefully enough time to figure something out on the fly, just because our tanks could last a couple of months maybe before we fully run out of liquid nitrogen and the level drops below the brain. But I also think that it only makes sense when we have way more patients, just because of the cost of production if you produce low amounts of liquid nitrogen. But I don't know if there's any other plans.
The last point is, if liquid nitrogen runs out, you probably already have a lot of other problems in society and so on, right? So probably there is the world where there is just no liquid nitrogen, but everything else still functions. It's very unlikely, most likely. So probably if you see on the horizon that there might come a time when liquid nitrogen cannot be delivered. The point of liquid nitrogen is also very important to a lot of other industries, including hospitals and so on. So if for whatever reason something has happened that stuff is not around anymore, we already probably want to be on another continent with everybody, with all the patients, right? So we would rather probably relocate at that point. There could be edge case scenarios, but making large amounts of liquid nitrogen is not easy because it needs tremendous amounts of energy and large air liquefiers. They're big machines, and it's not just something you buy a small machine and put it in the corner until you need it. It would be almost building another building plus a solar park.
All right, I guess. Please.
Thank you. You said you were moving away from the cooling chamber. I'm not sure I understand it. So you're replacing it with something else?
We have already replaced it. We have done 2 or 3 of our last cases in the cool down door that we call. Okay. It's the doors that you saw downstairs. The 4th one is the cool down door, where we've built all the tech that we had previously in the cool down box, the big wide one, into the lid of the door, and that has proven to be way better. We have some graphs that will be released at the end of the year as well that shows the cool down is more accurate as well because of the insulation. The main reason is the insulation. All right, if there are no other questions, we can have some coffee.
Okay. What are the biggest scientific challenges still stopping full body revival today?
Many. Not very technical.
Okay,
maybe more medical. I mean, maybe some technical challenges as well.
Yeah.
The main one is probably the amount of the warm-up speed. You would need to warm up very fast. That is currently technologically, from a physics perspective, pretty much not possible. Then there would need to be some amount of repair, that we wouldn't have the technology to do that type of repair. If someone wants to read more about this book that we discussed briefly before called Cryostasis Survival, like for the prayers, that one would be a good book to get a good understanding of what would be needed. And if you read the book, you get a quick understanding that as of today you will not have, you don't have.
Why did the cortex show less CPA than the inside of the brain?
Sorry, what?
Why did the cortex show less CPA than the inside of the
Maybe
brain?
this wasn't understood. Well, this is not the cortex. If we go back in slides, just to make it absolutely sure that
My slider doesn't work. If you just go back five,
go back
six.
2 slides, like where we see the
Yeah,
brain. Yeah, here we go. So this is not the cortex. This is a part of the brain that is shrunken. So in cryopreservation, the fluids that you perfuse are hyperosmolar. They have high osmolality. This means that they draw out water from the brain. This is so the brain, the surface of the brain starts here. So the cortex, I don't know if you can see this, but the cortex is about, on the outside of this green area. Here, this is fluid. There's no brain tissue in there. These are different mixes of cryoprotective agent, like different concentrations, right? So it's not that the cortex is not perfused. In fact, the cortex is usually the best perfused area of the brain. All right, now we're moving to a quick
Coffee
break.
session.
We would like everybody back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Back at 6:15 local time. So for those of you who might be in different time zones, in 17 minutes from now, 15 past the hour.
Love you.
All right. Hello. Thank you for having me today. I think this is the first Tomorrow.bio conference that I'm not able to attend in person, which I'm very sad about. But I'd like to talk about a few things today, do a little announcement, and talk about some of the challenges in the field of neurocribiology in particular. So, my name is Arsene de Wolf. I'm the CEO of Advanced Neurobiosciences. I also run an organization named Biostasis Technologies in New York. But for the purposes of this presentation, I mostly will be talking about the work we're doing at Advanced Neurobiosciences. So briefly, what we're going to talk about today and what we're doing at this company is like we're optimizing chemical fixation protocols for electron microscopy. As some of you know, the images that have been generated in traditional cryo do not look as good as we would like them to be. So that's a really important emphasis in our work right now. We design and validate brain-optimized vitrification solutions. I'm going to talk about that in a bit, what I mean with brain-optimized vitrification solutions. And, we keep sort of plugging away on creating vitrification solutions that have lower toxicity. And sort of right now, we can recover about 19% of viability in the solutions that we're using. Okay. So let's talk about VM1. VM1 is the vitrification agent that Tomorrow.bio is using. It actually has a longer history to that. It originated with a researcher named Yuri Pichugan, a Russian cryobiologist who used to work at the Cryonics Institute at the time. A lot of his research was aimed in coming up with a cost-effective, simple vitrification agent for the Cryonics Institute, and he was very successful in that. And that yielded the vitrification solution VM1. VM1 standing for vitrification mixture 1. Sort of, it's pretty simple. I think what's not very well known, not even in the community, that there actually have been a number of variations, or I would say generations of VM1. The original formulation by Yuri Pichugan, it's so simple, I can just spell it out, is basically equal parts of ethylene glycol and DMSO in a very simple carrier solution. The way Yuri introduced that vitrification solution for cryonics was to actually have the initial steps before using that solution to vitrify the brain, to do a number of initial steps with just ethylene glycol alone. The reasoning there was that ethylene glycol on its own is less toxic than DMSO or even the combination of EG and DMSO. When we actually researched that in our lab, we did not find that to be the case. So when I had to recommend a vitrification solution for Tomorrow.bio, I actually said do away with this sort of complicated ethylene glycol initial steps and just do all your steps with VM1. And another thing I recommended was starting with 5% VM1. Cryonics Institute used to start with 10%. That, in my opinion, is a very, very high first step and could lead to some degree of osmotic damage to cells if you start out sort of that high. So that was the solution I recommended. It has it has some other advantages as well. If you use all the steps, the same solution, but only in a lower concentration, you can also just mix up the carrier, you can mix up your highest concentration, and then you can do a number of dilutions. So that's one advantage of it. And another advantage that actually came to my attention sort of in the last year or so for CT scanning, it's actually much easier if you just use one simple solution where you know what all the different steps are. In fact, what makes CT scans so effective with our vitrification solution is the DMSO content. So the older Cryonics Institute VM1 formulation, the initial steps don't have DMSO in it, so it's kind of a lot harder sort of to image that. So that is what Tomorrow Bio have been using, and I've looked at a number of their CT scans, and they're actually look really good, even when there was significant warm ischemic delays. These CT scans actually often indicated complete penetration of the cryoprotectant agent sort of in all parts of the brain. So it was actually very encouraging to see. Right now, we're looking at even another variation of VM1. I'm not actually sure if we can still call it VM1 because we are adjusting the formula of the agent itself. It's no longer changing just the steps. It's just the composition of the solution itself. So maybe if and when we introduce it, that will be actually very soon. It may have a slightly different name. There are a number of advantages of this new VM1 variation. One is we find even further improved viability. One thing we found in the older solutions is the viability after cryopreservation was not the same as after just only cryoprotection. So we can expose neural tissue to VM1 and take it to cryogenic temperatures, and we don't see a difference between only exposure and taking it to these cryogenic temperatures. So we made some adjustments to make that happen. It's further optimized for field cryoprotection. Most of the cases of Tomorrow Bio are field cryoprotection cases, so it's very helpful that it can do its job for that sort of application. It's less viscous, and it's even a stronger glass former than the previous one. I cannot go into detail about the solution right now because the paper is pending, but I hope that that will be published soon, and then this solution will be public. So I think that's good news. Progressively better formulations of VM1. However, and this is what I want to talk about today. So what makes cryopreservation of the brain different from any other organs? Well, there is poor blood-brain barrier penetration of cryoprotectants. So what you see in ideal circumstances, and I should say ideal between quotation marks here, is that there is severe shrinking of the brain after perfusion. Another thing that's unique about the brain is its much higher sensitivity to cold ischemia. As sort of everyone knows, the brain can only go without oxygen for a very short period of time. You would lose consciousness a little bit longer, and it's harder to restore the brain without sort of any cognitive deficit, even after resuscitation. So as a result, there's only a very small window of opportunity to retain viability of the brain during cryoprotectant perfusion. And then one thing we found is that there might actually be agents that, generally speaking, work well in cryobiology, but not so much for the brain. And one that we identified as such in our work was acetylmide. If you are familiar with some of the early work of Gregory Fay, he used that, and he used other agents to neutralize sort of mutually neutralize the toxicity with acetylmide and DMSO. We found that acetylmide actually was very toxic in our model. So that was kind of interesting. We did not expect that. Okay. So let's look at VM1. So as I said, it consists of equal parts of DMSO and ethylene glycol. DMSO has poor blood-brain barrier penetration. Ethylene glycol has poor blood-brain barrier penetration. So the whole solution has poor blood-brain barrier penetration. Now let's look at M22. Let's look at some of those components. M22 has a lot more components, but I singled a number of them out to illustrate this point again. DMSO has poor blood-brain penetration. Ethylene glycol, same thing. PVPK12, which is an extracellular cryoprotectant, it cannot even penetrate the blood-brain barrier in ideal circumstances where there is no ischemia. The famous ice blockers X1000 and Z1000 cannot penetrate the blood-brain barrier at all. So a number of the signature components of M22 cannot even get into the brain. Okay, so this is a very famous image from the Elker Life Extension Foundation. This is what we call a good case because there was very little ischemia. It's an image of Fred Chamberlain, one of the founders of Elcor, and this is a public case, so you can just look this up. If you look at the CT scan, you don't have to be an expert of CT scans or neurobiology to see that it's a very shrunken brain. So I often show this image, and other people do as well, but this is not exclusive to Alcor. This is a more recent case of Tomorrow.bio. If you look at this image, that is a very shrunken brain. Again, in fact, that might even be more shrunken than the M22 brain I showed earlier. In the rat model, we often see brain shrinking up to 50%, and this seems pretty close to that number. So whether you use M22 or VM1 in very good conditions, when you don't modify the blood-brain barrier, your brain looks like this. I don't think anyone thinks that's ideal. In fact, when electromicrographs are generated of these brains, they look very shrunken at a very high magnification level. So it's not only here, if you actually look at the electron microscopy. And that is sort of the classic cryo that is often, dismissed by advocates of chemopreservation. And I would say not completely surprising, because this kind of brain, this kind of shrinking, the electron micrographs, that's not good. Now, I will say soon, and this has been said before, but I have very good indications there will be a paper that shows blood-brain barrier modification in combination with agents like M22, where things look a lot better. But as currently practiced in cryonics, this is a good case, and our good case is not particularly good at an ultrastructural level. So what are some of the ways to prevent shrinking of the brain? Now, you can ramp up the concentration of the cryoprotectant extremely slowly, but that leads to longer perfusion times and therefore much higher toxicity. There will be much longer cold ischemia, and maybe if you do it for a very long time, you would see some swelling, you see some edema as well. I'm actually not convinced that if you do very long perfusion times, you will actually prevent this brain shrinking. Maybe when you do an ultra long perfusion, but then your toxicity is so bad that you might as well have done chemical fixation, because you're not actually doing anything to try to retain viability of brain cells. There's some limited evidence that perfusion at sub-zero temperatures might modify the blood-brain barrier, but these temperatures have to be very, very low. I don't think that's very practical for cryonics as practice today. One thing that does open the blood-brain barrier is cerebral ischemia. So theoretically, you can have a couple of hours of cerebral ischemia, and that way you can deliver the cryoprotectant. So the response here is like, are you serious? I mean, that is a trade-off you don't want, right? And then I think the most promising thing is to open the blood-brain barrier with detergents. Europechugan, again, explored that many years ago, and detergents such as SDC and SDBS work, but you have to be very careful. If you don't use enough, you still get a lot of shrinking. If you use too much, you actually get a lot of swelling, and not just in the brain, in all parts of the body when we're talking about whole body cryoprotection. And I've seen some very extreme cases of that in my lab. I once made a math error and I gave 10 times as much of that detergent, and the weight of the animal doubled, like sort of the rat after perfusion gained sort of, there was enormous weight gained. So these are not innocent molecules. And another thing that might be possible is to identify a new series of cryoprotectants that can actually cross the blood-brain barrier. And that is something we have researched advanced at my company over the last sort of couple of years. And I will talk about that in a little bit. Okay, well, first about these blood-brain modifiers and whole body edema. So here is, for example, some weight change. Like for example, if you do a cryoprotectant perfusion with VM1 and you don't use a blood-brain barrier modifier, you actually lose a little bit of weight. That's, I think, sometimes surprising to people because in the real world of cryonics, often you see weight gain, but that has to do with ischemia, not so much with the cryoprotectant. If you use the right amount of SDC blood-brain modifier, you can also reduce that weight. So, and then there's the SDS-BS blood-brain barrier modifier, and there's almost no weight gain either. So it is possible. You can introduce these kind of molecules without any weight gain and eliminate cryoprotectant-induced shrinking of the brain. So then there are further research topics. Last year, actually, Greg Fay talked a little bit about that, right? Sort of what is the effect of these blood-brain modifiers and viability? So let's say you add them to a solution and you do brain slices, and you can look at electron microscopy. For example, you would expect that if you eliminate that shrinking, your electron microscopy would look very good, maybe even as good as the aldehyde stabilized cryoprotection that looks so great in the paper. Unfortunately, that doesn't turn out to be the case yet, and a number of us in the field having a very extensive conversation what some of the artifacts are that we're still seeing in these electron micrographs. And actually in the last couple of months, in conversations with the people at Oregon Brain Preservation, and now Scott Sparks Brain Preservation, Andy McKenzie, I think we've made sort of a little breakthrough in sort of understanding how there can still be artifacts in traditional cryo-electron micrographs in which the blood-brain barrier has been opened. Okay, so if you open up the blood-brain barrier, you can actually do something very nifty that we were not able to achieve before. If you perfuse the brain without opening the blood-brain barrier, and then you unload the cryoprotectant, and then you subject these slices to a viability assay, they're usually very, very poor. It can really not go through this shrinking and restoring of volume process without losing a lot of viability. And that's probably no surprise, because if you shrink a brain to 50% its size, it's hard to imagine that viability remains the same. If you actually open up the blood-brain barrier with one of these these modifiers, one thing we found in our lab and is that you can actually perfuse up to about 50% of the vitrification solution without loss of viability in the brain slices that you derive from those brains. I won't go into much detail sort of how that works, because that is, again, pending publication, but that's actually sort of pretty encouraging, and it's consistent with just a hunch I had many years ago that viability in cryonics can be maintained about up to halfway cryoprotectant perfusion. After that, the exposure time, the concentration of cryoprotectants is probably still too excessive to maintain that kind of viability. But being able to go there without loss of viability is actually pretty cool. I don't think that is something you could routinely see in practical cryonics in the field, but at least you can say, okay, these technologies are compatible with these kind of outcomes. In isolated brain slices, you can easily go above 80% in VM1, M22. We're actually getting even higher right now with some of these new solutions. Now, here's the thing. These brain optimized solutions that I earlier talked about, cryoprotectants that have good blood-brain barrier penetration, there's a trade-off there. These hippocampal slices don't do so well. Viability is pretty poor. And that raises a really interesting issue that I'm sort of going to close this presentation with. Okay, and here are some examples, by the way, of what happened when you open the blood-brain barrier. So all the way to the left, you see a red brain that has been perfused with M22 alcohol solution, and you can see it's quite shrunken. Then to the right of that, you see VM1, it's Cryonics Institute, but also Tomorrow.bio, it's again very shrunken. And then you see one brain that has been perfused with one of these brain optimized cryoprotectants. So we did not even open up the blood-brain barrier. We used these cryoprotectants that we discovered that can actually be equilibrated with the brain without shrinking it. So that looks pretty encouraging. So if you want to design cryoprotectants specifically for the brain, what do you need to look for? What are all the things that you need to consider? Well, you want to minimize components with poor blood-brain barrier penetration. That seems kind of obvious, right? You may want to reduce or eliminate non-penetrating cryoprotectants. As I was indicating before, some of today's cryoprotectants, if you look at the history of these cryoprotectants, it's usually other organs where these molecules have been pretty favorable, but for brain preservation, they might not be. Maybe there is a washout solution that favors brain cryopreservation. That's actually something we're looking at right now, because the current protocol at Tomorrow.bio is basically to use MHP2, which is a good whole body washout solution, but it's not really optimized for washout and hyperthermic stabilization of the brain. Reducing perfusion time to decrease viscosity, reduce cold ischemia, so maybe even doing sub-zero perfusion, optimization of carrier solution. The new generation of VM1 actually has a slightly different carrier solution that retains better viability. You want to validate, of course, toxicity in central nervous system models, right? Sort of the kidney or the liver or the heart is interesting, and it's great if a solution does well in these organs, but you really want to validate the toxicity, because as I indicated, it may not always be the same. And electron microscopy is really important in traditional cryo. There's a lot of emphasis on viability, but clearly you want to have good altar structure. That, I think, is a no-brainer. So to wrap it all up, let's think about structure versus viability, right? In chemopreservation or chemical preservation, these people can show very good ultrastructure. I remember one representative of Nectome some years ago at the Alcor conference showing electron micrographs, a control and a chemically fixed one, and then the audience was challenged to distinguish between the two, and it was not really possible. It looked like really good. I think that's undeniable. And so it's good, excellent ultrastructure, but there's no viability at all, right? If you cross-link the brain with a chemical fixative, then by contemporary biological criteria, the brain is dead. Now, that's not necessarily a showstopper for future revival, either scanning technology or Merkel-Freitas style advanced molecular nanotechnology can break these crosslinks, but by contemporary criteria, that brain is dead. And then in traditional cryonics, right now, there hasn't been good evidence for good to excellent ultrastructure. A lot of it is simply because of the CPA-induced shrinking of the brain. But even with these blood-brain barrier modifiers, we do not get that kind of good ultrastructure that you see in chemical preservation. As I was saying earlier, I think we have a better understanding why that is right now, and there's more going on than blood-brain barrier modification. So staying tuned for that. But viability generally is good in these protocols. Maybe at some point it's compromised about sort of halfway of cryoprotectant perfusion, and that has been one of the critiques of traditional cryos, like, well, you guys put a lot of emphasis on viability, but if you lose it anyway, halfway of cryoprotection, then why not just go with chemical fixation? So that's sort of a perspective that has been thrown around. There's a lot to unpack here, which I cannot do in this conversation, but I just mention it. But there might actually be a third way, and that is using sort of traditional cryobiology technologies for very good, excellent ultrastructure, and then having to accept some compromised viability. Now, given the fact that we have to compromise viability in traditional cryo at some point anyway, that might be a really interesting way to think about it. These brain-optimized cryoprotectants, these cryoprotectants that can penetrate the brain, that do not need blood-brain barrier modification, don't have the greatest viability. But what if they have very good structure, so that we might sort of get the best of both worlds, good ultrastructure, but we don't create billions of crosslinks. So I'm just throwing that out as sort of another way to look at it. All right. Okay. I want to sort of briefly mention a few other things that my lab has been involved in. As some of you may know, Cryo.bio is an organization that uses blockchain technologies to fund cryonics relevant cryobiology research. And sort of I was very honored to be the recipient of a pretty big grant to do true whole body cryopreservation research. Ultimately, the objective is to revive a small animal, in this case, the rat, from high sub-zero temperatures, go to a temperature that no one has gone before. I was kind of reluctant to accept this challenge because I know it's extraordinarily hard. And I said, well, we can only do this under one condition, and that is that we have a number of discrete milestones that we know are prerequisites to do this, and unless we achieve these prerequisites, we will not even make these kind of attempts. So a lot of the communication about this project is about expectations management. A lot of people think like, oh, it shouldn't be too hard to do revival of a small animal, but actually in many ways it's just as hard as if you would try it in a human. And there's actually, in some ways, it's harder because the microsurgery is actually pretty complex. But I do think we will learn a lot, and we will also learn a lot about if we optimize for the brain in a whole body model, sort of what does that entail? If we optimize for the other organs, what does that mean for the brain? Do we eventually need different cryoprotectants for the brain and the rest of the body? And so a lot of it is sort of relevant to the topics I discussed earlier. quite recently, we acquired a micro CT scanner, which allows us to do a lot of different tweaks and protocols and then look inside of the body, sort of how it affects cryoprotection and equilibration. So that's pretty cool, and sort of hopefully we have something to report on that. One thing I often mention during my presentation, if you look at 90% of the online conversations and discussions about cryonics, it's usually about questions and topics that are addressed in Robert Freida's massive cryostasis revival book. It's the most comprehensive, detailed technical work ever written on cryonics revival. But it's not just on cryonics revival. It just covers pretty much every technical topic that is relevant to human cryopreservation. In fact, it even has chapters on biological revival of chemically fixed brains. So I strongly recommend it if you don't have the book yet. It's more than 700 pages. It has 3,000 reference and 300 further research topics. And you can get it sort of on Amazon. There's also a free PDF online, but it's probably the kind of book you want to just sit down with. I always recommend it in my talks because I've noticed that people who have really studied the book, can engage with these topics on a much sort of higher level, or it's something you can give to a skeptical friend or colleague. Another thing I want to mention is my other organization, Biostasis Technologies, have launched this Substack, this blog called Biostasis Standard. I think at this point, I think it's fair to say it's the most active, biggest online cryonics publication in the world. So it has a newsletter and it has articles from multiple contributors. In particular, Max Moore writes a lot of content for it, and I do occasionally write something as well for it. And then we have a lot of interesting guest authors contributing. We have a monthly podcast that's also hosted by Max Moore, and we've already had some sort of really interesting guests from the major cryonics organizations. Emil has been there. People from the Cryonics Institute have been there, Sutter Cryonics, and we also hope to have people on who are not so much part of the cryonics community, but are working in adjacent fields. So the goal is to promoting sort of education and awareness within the community, but also general population. We hope whenever people search on one of these sort of typical cryonics questions, that sort of they land on our publication and find some answers there. So if you just go to biostasissubstack.com, you can subscribe there. It's free. Of course, we appreciate it if you also financially support it. If you financially support it, you can also comment on the articles. One thing we found what was really interesting, if you allow people to comment in cryonics on articles, it easily becomes chaos. But when you only allow that privilege for paid members, it's actually pretty civilized and nice. But at any rate, I strongly encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter. All right. And yeah, that's it for my presentation. So thank you much for listening. Again, I wish I could be there. It's always been so cool and to see what Tomorrow Bio is up to. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Ashwin. We greatly appreciate it. In the interest of time, we unfortunately can't do a Q&A, but thank you very much, Ashwin.
Thank you.
All right, Ben, you're next. Also, in the interest of time, because you have a lot of slides, so just make sure you have somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes. You can clip it on or
So This is an update of the presentation I gave last year. So I'm Director of Research Oversight for BRLS. It's a organization that funds cryonics research to the tune of about $8 to $9 million a year, so more than any other funding organization. One of their recipients is Rodolfo Goya, who's worked in Argentina, and he's attempting to vitrify mouse hearts as a proof of principle. The hearts can be vitrified and stored for transplant. And this is his apparatus, and he successfully perfused for 1 hour. And this morning, he's done several experiments with this VMP solution of ethylene glycol bromide dimethylate, and produced the experiment 7 of this series produced the best results for ventricular beating, and other experiments only had atrial beating, atrial. Anyway, we just heard from Ashton DeWolf. We also fund his Biostasis Technologies organization, headquartered in New York City. It's designed to develop technologies and standards for other organizations and meta-analysis of cryonics cases. And I guess most people know what SST stands for. I think Ashman invented this acronym. Anyway, faster cooling is better. So it's cooling with ice bath is faster than cooling with ice bath, and the water should be circulated. Okay, so Tim Gibson said that I could humiliate him with this slide. So you can see the difference between the bottom one is the cooling with a squid, and you can see that you can see to reach a temperature around 15 degrees. You can do it with the squid in maybe an hour, but with without the squid, to reach 15 degrees, it'd be about 3 hours. So that's quite a difference. Apparently the UK cryonics team does not use squids. They just use ice and water, and they don't circulate the water. Circulating water produces better cooling. So anyway, internal cooling is also faster than external cooling, an ice bath, but it requires surgery, and also you need to get to a low temperature. So it would be better to cool the patient with cold fluid in the blood vessels, but this technology of cooling through the lungs, liquid ventilation, can be done very rapidly without requiring surgery. And so that's liquid ventilation has been a long time in development. And it's fun getting to be done. You can see from this graph, this is what the potential cooling rate would be for the far left arrow would be in a pig if we could do liquid ventilation, get this fluid in the lungs rather than just cooling by internal. So Charles Bias has been working on this, and he's working with Biostasis Technology, and he's also built ice baths. He's very genius in And this is development of estimates of the standard measure of ischemia, ideally 0 minutes of ischemia, but it's about more managed outdoor cases have an estimates of around 2 and 3.5 hours. So liquid ventilation can hopefully get a much better cooling rate and a theoretical very low estimates. This is sort of, so he's still working. Charles Pratt keeps working on it now. He's trying to make the liquid ventilation system more robust for air shipment. It's no good if you have a system that's got delicate parts that all these transport people can bang around and ruin. So anyway, we finally are hoping to be able to have a working system that's air transportable and can be easily tested. Biostasis technology demonstrated about dry shipping. It doesn't depend on oxygen, but can be hopefully regulation temperature to ship a brain. And research in biomedical technology is for funding and also spin animation. And this is Houston Westfall, who's the CEO of both organizations. And they offer spin animation offers SST for Aqua and Price Institute in the continental United States, based on a flight and point model, which wants to burn out organ preservation system and shipping to a cryopreservation. So it's basically mainly in South Florida, and with branches in New York City and California. And we're contracting with Tomorrow Biostasis for these locations, or we actually contract with these locations. As I say, and the Price Institute providing these services, it's got a bunch of employees, for city respiratory. Anyway, we want to have a research in medical, private hospital care associated with anti-aging treatments and other profit-generating activities. First, you can correct me, this is most of the information is right, it's wrong. This wrong, the RBS board members and RBS technical expert died rapidly on May 9th of this year, following cancer cancer. RBS did SST hospital transporting fractions for procedures, and Tomorrow Biostasis had 2 cases in New York, and appointment in May, and I guess I had this wrong. First question about my errors, but there probably be cases, and all the case reports describe corrective action being addressed here. This is the largest organization receiving our funding, quite a few $1 million every year. Greg Fay is the CEO. The goal is to review the rapid kidney vitrification solution, total kidney project to resolve the kidney transplant to a living rabbit. So what this is used with pig kidneys and eventually human kidneys. And so vitrification, I guess I won't go with that. It's a vitrified kidney in the right-hand side. There's method, the snowball if you don't vitrify. And these are your typical cryoprotectants, but which are all toxic. And this is a big problem. If we could have cryoprotectants that aren't toxic, we wouldn't have a eliminate toxicity and kidneys be viable, but actually got 4 mice. So anyway, actually, a rat kidney was 55 in Minnesota, actually in 2023, and was rewarded with nanoparticles and with complete backbone and functionality of the kidney. So this has been done in a rat, and the next step is to try to reconstitute it in a rabbit. And they found some protective agents, the designated CPA 1 to 4, and CPA 2 is the best so far, and they're doing many experiments to optimize it. Unlike Info 2, surprise, that's how the name Info 2 comes from. It requires -22 degrees Celsius to be Celsius below the kidney, but actually CPA 2 -10 degrees maybe achievable with less kidney injury. And so they're also working laboratory, and so they demonstrate EEG activity that's about measure viability, and they found the optimum STS is the brain barrier opening concentration. We found to be 0.7%. Because if you have too much disturbance, you get a demon. If you have too little, you don't open the book. So, finding the optimal STS, I think this is right, because it proves that it's going to work in all cases. Now, we also have Alexander Stolze work operating a separate company in the 21st century medicine facility, and with separate grants from RBS. And he's going in a big study which showed what takes a main cellular function to pick rates 1 hour after death. And the company showed stable lactate and glucose utilization. It's 60-hour fusion experiment, LDH activity up to 1.2 hours. And there's evidence that cells stop dying after 9 hours of fusion. So it's a platform for studying very injury mechanism, moving ischemia nerves and injury, and also working drugs and testing the drugs to protect against the victory. Now, of great interest to this organization is the reanimated storage facility being built at the 21st century medicine. Reanimated storage. So the original probation date was for December 2024, but the original frame showed that will not proceed until August 2025. Now it's expected to be completed by end of this year. So we're actually happening in the next few weeks. Exponential ITS pulling the ITS is expected to take another week. Programming can begin with ITS. When the ITS program is achieved, the reproduction must be a lot programming to maintain the temperature. And then the reproduction is supposed to be also be disassembled and for shipping, and the means of shipment has yet to be ensured, and I hope to do it before the end of the year. So finally, A&B actually spoke about its laboratory, Genesis, lead scientists, and all the other employees, staff, and they were going to choose by person, and one of those cases were interested in one by alcohol. Input was optimized for rabbit kidney, slice protection, whereas BM1 was optimized for brain hippocampus. Input is very expensive, and BM1 is not very expensive. Aliens discovered the cryopreservation quality of BM1 can be improved by addition of an ion. PM1 is stable, dry temperature, which it produces in 12 ice after less than 2 days at dry temperature. Here, cryopreservation involves vitrification solution for use in the field product shipment in dry instant cryopreservation. The vitrification solution must be stable and dry instant for FCP. Irradiates in order to develop for treatment protocol. Which described as is the following protocol is being used by Tomorrow Biostasis. And actually, great data input has been the case of solution refers very asking some VMO is that great data is testing at 21st century medicine and continuing future. So I mentioned is quite out there, and he purchased a lot of new equipment, both building a micro CT scanner, which we know is two organs for the rat, it's a rat based computer, and one piece of equipment can full sample with the limit picture at a control rate. And anything can use this equipment for carried out for any research. Actually, they've been spending railroads for 40 years in Portland Railroad. And now expect to be spending half this time.
Do some in-person questions. Anyone have questions?
Okay. I'm glad I answered all your questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben.
Nice. Hello, everyone. I'm the last speaker, so then you're free to go. I am Alessia. I joined Tomorrow.bio 2 years ago, and I work in the marketing team. But this weekend I was also a cook, a cleaner, and a speaker, so it's pretty nice. Tomorrow.bio is actually a lot of things. And yeah, it's actually my first time speaking in front of so many people, so wish me luck. Thank you so much. So wish me luck and let's get started. I promise I will be fast. So today we are talking about community, why it's so important for us, and what you can expect from Tomorrow.bio in the next coming month. So let's start easy on what is a community. So a community isn't just a group of people having something, whatever in common. Actually, a community is moving in the same direction. Okay, I don't know in this room how many of you are lucky enough to have a person, a family member, a friend, a partner, a close person who supports you and supports your life choice. Because in the end, cryonics is a life choice, is a big choice. And maybe you're lucky, but for most of the people, it's not that easy. Many people struggle to find that person and struggle to find a network support. And I'm just not talking about physical support. I'm actually talking about emotional support. So that's why, to us, okay, that's why to us a community is extremely important, and actually that's us yesterday. It's a very cool picture, and a community exists when people stop being isolated and start to build something together. And I know for sure, because we did a lot of customer interviews with our members, that for you, cryonics was probably an individual, personal, rational choice. But I firmly believe that this choice only makes sense or is worth it only if you know that you're not doing this alone. Now, maybe some of you already joined a cryonic community, a cryonics forum, whatever. You might have noticed that it's full of people which are extremely smart, extremely competent, and they talk often about extremely complex topic. Cryoprotectants, which is the best provider, which is the best, whatever. And don't get me wrong, I love that. Most of the times I'm shocked by the amount of knowledge these people actually have, in a positive way, shocked, of course. And the thing is that this is not what keeps people around, at least not most of the people or the majority of the people, because what keeps people around is actually a real connection. So what do we want to do at Tomorrow Bio moving forward is actually building a community, growing a community, and connect people who share the same values and the same goals. And with goals, I mean the same forward-thinking lifestyle. I mean people who want to live longer and better, and people who support each other. And I'm not talking just today, this live, but maybe also in the future. I don't know. I really hope to see you all in the next couple of years or maybe more decades. So we are moving the first steps towards achieving this community. And this is actually what you can expect from Tomorrow Bio in the next months. We are starting with events. The best way to connect is actually face-to-face, like we're doing now, networking, talking with people. And what we want to do is actually doing sign-up events. We might want to change the name because sign-up events sounds a bit serious, but actually I'm talking about, you know, friendly gatherings with just a few people, people that share your same life choice, or maybe people that are talking about that and in cool location. The pro will be that actually you will have close connection and you will actually talk with just a few people, you can create connection, and that's very cool. We will do that all around Europe. We will probably start from Germany because for us it's easier being based in Berlin. But of course, the idea is to move all around Europe. The next thing will be webinars. I love webinars. We will probably cover all the aspects about cryonics and Tomorrow Bio, from engineering to medical, and why not, maybe also marketing. And every webinar will have a Q&A session. We discovered that many people has many questions, and it's fair to address them all. And it's also a way, you know, to, being more close. Last thing about this topic will be videos. We will do a lot of videos, educational videos. We will try to cover all the stages of the journey. So from people that know cryonics for 10 years to people that just got to know cryonics because they saw that in the newspaper, which really happens a lot of times. Second thing is Club of Tomorrow, which is our WhatsApp community. Some of you are already in there. This is the QR code that will lead you to joining the community on WhatsApp. It's for member only, so if you're not a member, I'm sorry, but you cannot enter. Since some of you ask about joining, this is the link. You can put your name and your phone number. We will make sure to add you after this event is done, so probably next week on Wednesday. What can you do in this WhatsApp community? Actually, it's a place to connect, since people cannot always attend events. So connecting online is fastest, and you can do it anytime. You can find people that took the same life choice, people that may have the same interest. You can ask questions, you can chat with us, with team members. I will probably be the one replying to your questions and putting the blue heart emoji to your messages, and you will get updates on Tomorrow Bio, and you will get the founder newsletter, which is misspelled, I'm sorry. The founder newsletter is a project that started 1 month ago. Basically, our founders, Emil and Fernando, will write monthly a newsletter. Topics, I mean, I don't want to spoiler the topics, but they will range from ethics of cryonics to simply what happened during the last month at Tomorrow.bio. Member Zone. That's a project I'm personally working on now. So I'm very excited, and I hope to give you like updates in the next couple of weeks. We have a member zone now. I like to call it version 1 because we will soon have version 2. The member zone is now a place where you can see your plans, what you're paying, your contract, you can upload your documents, you can switch your membership plan from monthly to annual to lifetime. We have some videos there, you can get updates there, but the vision of this member zone is actually like goes beyond that. I want it to be a proper hub that will be with you every time. So the final vision will actually be having an application that you can open whatever you want. You will have a place where you can store your photos, your memories. Of course, we will keep the functionality, so you will still see your data, your plans, what you're paying, but we will adding more and more functionality. For example, you can track your health data through your wearables and stuff like that. I, again, really hope to be able to show you the version 2 in a couple of weeks. We have designers designing the new member zone, and it's pretty cool so far. So let's see, but that's a nice project. But another thing which is nicer is the membership. The membership, classic membership with Tomorrow.bio. That's pretty much an hot topic for us, especially for the marketing team lately, because we want an answer to the first question, which is how can increase the value of the membership for our members? It seems an easy question, but it's not that easy. We, as I was saying at the beginning, taking the first steps, and this is what you can expect from your membership. Basically, we want to have different welcome boxes based on different membership type. We want to give you discounts to companies that actually aligns with our vision. So, of course, we want you to live longer and better, I was saying before. So probably they will be longevity companies, they will be tools, services, or supplements, for example. And of course, you will have discounts. You don't have to pay full price. That's why you have a membership with us. Then another hot topic is our app for emergencies. We are testing it. All the members are testing it, and I'm testing it now with my Oura Ring. So yeah, your wearables will link to the app, and that's very cool because we will cover a lot of cases, a lot of emergency, and that will be extremely cool. And last but not least, we want to integrate a set of options to store your memories, both digitally but also physically. We actually have a feedback session this morning, and this was one of the actually points that someone brought up. So, of course, people want to bring memories with them in the next life. Our Lego sets. That's very, very cool. I'm not the biggest Lego fan. I've never built one. Guilty. But we built that at the office just to test them. And it was so cool and so fun that I probably want to buy another one. Probably I will build this one. And we have these big ones here at the facility. Unfortunately, we have just 10 pieces left. You can see the price there. It's actually the perfect replica of our doer. So you will have the doer, which is like kind of this big. You will have 4 minifigures that you need to put upside down inside the doer. And you also have, this is it, feeling like I'm selling mattresses, but yeah. And in the middle, you also have actually the column for the brains. So very, very perfect. Lego brains, of course. Yeah, they're very small. So we also have the small version, which is this one. It's a bit more boring, but it's not that fun. But of course, It's like more easy to make. It costs less, of course. It's now in pre-order because we will receive that in November. But of course, you can already pay that, and we will make sure to ship it to you. Yeah, it's very cool. It's, of course, a limited edition, so I think it would be nice to get one before day goes out. And I think I said everything about the viewers. And yeah, we can continue. I hope that the message that we want to build something different, a community which is different at Tomorrow.bio is clear now, because actually the future should not feel lonely. It should feel more like joining something or someone with the same value as you have. And that's a very nice quote. We believe the future doesn't belong to those who wait for it, but who build it actively. And I'm very happy that we're building it together this weekend. So it was very important. Thank you very much for joining it. I had like beautiful conversation, and it's always nice to see you once a year. I want to finish this with this quote, which is cut, but anyway. This is a quote from Fernando, our co-founder. He wrote that in the first founders newsletter and last month. So I think this quote really sums up what we want to build at Tomorrow.bio and what we want to do and what I just said. I really hope that this quote will give you the same hope I had while I was reading it. So yeah, it's very nice. I am done. And guys, thank you very much. This is over.
All right, everybody, on site and remotely, this closes this year's official part of Biostasis 2020. Ah, okay, there's a lottery going on where you can win one of these things. So head out to those people over there. They will do everything, but we're closing the stream at least, or the cameras over there, in fact. We're closing the stream, I think, for now. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, either here on site or remotely. Of course, dinner today is not organized by us, so feel free to grab a couple of people in the sense of community building and have dinner with them, right? If you want one of those Lego doers, right, they're over there, so you can pick one of those up. And of course, if you win one, you want to win one, you can try here first. I think there's one of those is also to be won. Nevertheless, thank you so much, everybody on the stream, and talk to you soon.